Дякуємо за авто підписникам Меркадо Медіа. В цей час воно нам дуже необхідно.
Дякуємо глядачам каналу Меркадо Медіа за збір на цю автівку. Слава ЗСУ!
Слава Україні! Я головний сержант 2-ї саперної інженерної роти 33-го окремого інженерного батальйону. Хочу висловити подяку Меркадо та його підписникам за таку чудову машину. Ця машина нас приведе ближче до перемоги. Победа за нами, слава Україні!
Hi guys, today I want to appreciate the Mercado Media, all the friends and subscribers, and the Navy community for this wonderful pickup truck. Слава Україні!
Героям слава! Всім привіт! Я Вадим, позивний режисер, 42-га окрема механізована бригада. Ми зараз ведемо бої на Харківщині. Дякую Меркадо Медіа і всім підписникам його каналу за придбаний автомобіль. Він дозволить нам ефективно і успішно виконувати бойові завдання на Харківщині. Я сподіваюся, що цей автомобіль дозволить швидше здобути нашу перемогу. Слава Україні!
I want to give a big thank you to Mercado Media and Johnny FD, two close friends who have helped me create this fundraiser between ourselves to help raise funds for what is needed essentially on the front line. And I also want to give a big thank you to both Mercado Media and Johnny FD's followers for helping us achieve this goal of funding the first car for our fundraiser. The car is going to be put to good use on the front lines in aiding us with helping to carry out our mission and also helping us to clear Ukraine of the invader. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Mercado Media, Johnny FD, Kostak Gundi, and all your subscribers for the generous donation of this van. It will help us with our logistics in the International Legion.
Dear friends of NAFO, my name is Pete, hasta la vista, from Project Konstantin. This beautiful beast was donated to the brigade that we're friendly with in the forest, 67 Brigade. 69th Infantry Brigade donating to 67. It's pretty cool. I keep bumping into this vehicle in the forest. We never have time. We never have time to actually make any videos or get inside your vehicle and do any missions with it because we're like passing ships in the night here. But Mercado Media, Andrew, you NAFO supporters, it's beautiful to see this grand vehicle that you've got for this brigade because it's a reliable vehicle and I've never seen it anywhere other than in the forest. I've never seen it in the garage. And yes to that, and all Ukrainians must live. Bakhmut is Ukraine. This forest is Ukraine. And Mercado Media and NAFO, you guys are here supporting us, man, and we freaking love you to pieces. Thank you for what you're doing for the soldiers of Ukraine. God bless you. To victory. Do Peremohe.
Hey everybody, there's my camera. Hey everybody, how we doing today on February 28th, 2025? Got another panel discussion today. The news happened already this morning. Oval Office meeting with Zelensky did not go well. Donald Trump and JD Vance absolutely ambushed him, but we'll talk about my opinion on that later, where we have an amazing panel that we're going to get to here that's going to give you guys all their takes about it and about the war. And it's going to be great. Before we get into it, you can support Ukraine by donating to Project Konstantin and the 67th Brigade. All right, you guys can donate to them and support that way. Let me unmute myself here. All right, so donate to the 67th Brigade, you guys, and Project Konstantin to continue to support. We're going to have another truck fundraiser very soon so you guys can support Ukraine with NAFO or with Cars for Ukraine. And also our panelists today are going to, at the very end, before they leave, will tell you how they support Ukraine, and then you could support their initiatives as well. All right, so without further ado, we're going to be getting going with our panel here, you guys. Let me pull it up full screen. I'm also going to be recording this panel. There's our panelists here. Let me pull up on screen. All right, let me hit the record button, turn off my chat. All right, and there we go. Can you guys hear me? Everybody hear me good? Okay, I have you guys muted though. Okay, there we go. All right, perfect. So this is another panel on Ukraine. Welcome to today's panel on Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. We have an incredible group of experts joining us, including military analysts, frontline journalists, and independent researchers who have dedicated their work to understanding and exposing the realities of the war. Before we dive into the discussions, let's start off with introductions. Let's start off with Operator Starsky. Why don't you tell us who you are and what you do for Ukraine?
Hello, my friends. I'm Operator Starsky, also know me as Andrew. I'm running a YouTube channel dedicated to the community that supports Ukraine since the very beginning of the full-scale invasion. I was a press officer in the 4th Operative Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine, the Hostomel Brigade, and before that I served for almost 10 years in the infantry and police special force. And basically, I'm very, very happy to be here today, despite all that fucking disgrace that we could see today in the White House, but I think we will talk about it a bit later.
And indeed we will. All right, let's go with Macer. I'm not hearing you. And also, one of your guys' audio is a little jacked, I think. I'm hearing like big feedback in audio from one of you. I'm still Terrell's muted, Macer's muted.
My mic's muted, so I don't think it's me.
No.
It might be me.
Tab open, maybe you have the stream open in another tab or something.
No, it's gone now. It's fixed now.
It's fixed now.
Not me, I muted it. My bad.
You're good. All right, Macer, you're still muted a little bit? No, it's still muted. Okay, he said I think he's gonna fix it. 1 second. Let's go to Dylan Burns while we're waiting for Macer to fix it. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, my name's Dylan Burns. I'm a freelance war journalist, mostly focusing on Ukraine, but I talk about Myanmar and some other countries as well. Do a lot of on-the-ground war journalism. And I also stream weekly talking about geopolitics and American domestic politics, which, of course, there is plenty to talk about. Stream Monday through Friday. Dylan Burns TV.
Thank you, Dylan.
Can you hear my voice, by the way?
We can.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm very technically bad. Hi, everyone. My name is Macy Gifford. I was a international volunteer in the Ukrainian military. I served with the 131st, mostly in and around Kherson in the south, but also in a place called Liman in the Far East. Still support the guys on the ground and still raise money for them. And also utterly disgusted at what I saw today and very keen to talk about it.
Philip Ittner.
I'm Philip Ittner. I'm a veteran journalist, war journalist. I was deputy bureau chief for CBS News in Baghdad, bureau chief for Voice of America in Islamabad and Kandahar. I'm sorry, in Kabul. And have been coming to Ukraine for over 25 years. Was on Maidan in 2014 and promised that when, not if, the Russians came back to regain their colony, that I would come and at least bear witness. So that's my intent. Been here since the beginning of the full scale and now run a production studio in the center of Kyiv, from where we help other journalists create content, but we ourselves put out a weekly interview show Sundays at 8 p.m. Kyiv time, which is 10 a.m. Pacific. We call it On the Edge, and it's on. You can catch it, as I say, every Sunday on my channel, Philip Ittner, 1L and Philip 2 T's and Ittner, and we try to platform people who have unique voices when it comes to this conflict, and of course, most importantly, Ukrainian voices.
Thank you for that, Philip. Terrell.
Yeah, so happy to be on with you again, second time. And I am the host of the Black Diplomats YouTube channel podcast. That name is going to be rebranded to Worldwide with Terrell Starr. You'll see that next week. But I have been coming to Ukraine since 2008. And I live in Ukraine now. I live here at least 6 months out of the year. How I help Ukraine as I travel the United States. I speak at public institutions, namely universities, talking to people who are outside the think tank community about Ukraine and providing information to people who otherwise wouldn't be a part of the conversation. So I look at myself as, you know, the experts talk to Washington, D.C. and the New York crowd. I talk to everybody else. And so I make Ukraine accessible to American audiences, and as well as produce weekly content from people talking about civilian life during the war.
Thank you, Terrell. And John.
Hi, my name is John Jackson. I was actually a trial lawyer before the war. I'm in the process of switching careers to being a pilot, but I served in the 130th as an infantry unit throughout 2023. Went back to Ukraine in 2024 in a civilian capacity to support my unit and some of the guys I still work with. I have a just starting Substack YouTube channel in which I support Ukraine and try to speak out for Ukraine as to current political issues and affect it. And also on my Twitter as well, you'll see me posting lots of videos about, you know, what's going on in this crazy world and this crazy president we have. So I'm sure we'll get into that. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, John. And again, this is going to be more of a structured panel. I'm going to be asking tailored questions. I do have some questions I'll ask all of you, but like this first one we're going to go into, and I want a response from all of you. Please try not to talk over each other. Just wait for the other person to finish and then respond, and I'll allow that too, back and forth without me asking questions, of course. So today, of course, with the news, with the Oval Office meeting today, President Zelensky and President Trump had a heated exchange over Ukraine's war efforts, with Trump accusing Zelensky of gambling with World War II. The meeting was supposed to focus on Ukraine's mineral deal, but ended abruptly with a press conference, or without one, rather, sorry, without one. What does this moment tell us about the state of U.S. support for Ukraine moving forward? Let's start with Operator Starsky.
So first of all, bro, to me, it looked like a staged event, literally, because at first I could not connect dots, really, speaking of all the events that took place earlier with Russians saying absolutely controversial things, with American side also saying absolutely controversial things, and there was no common no common position, no common point, no mutual point for Russians and United States and Ukraine. And now I can see clearly that in my personal opinion, that it was literally a staged attack on Zelensky in the White House. And I believe that soon we may probably see the meeting with Trump and Putin, probably sanctions lifted before summer or things like that. Not 100% sure, but this is something that we can anticipate, again, in my personal opinion. But it was interesting. I completely understand President Zelensky, who left the White House earlier, because, when you have to communicate with imbeciles, you really need to think like them, and it's very, very hard at times. So I completely understand his position, why he had to leave. But on the other hand, when I was looking at the face of President Donald Trump, I realized that, this is the face of a person who finally understands that Ukraine is not the US puppet. So after this meeting, I was left with controversial feelings, but at the same time, again, we anticipated that they are absolutely uneducated individuals there in the White House, who absolutely have no idea what happens in Ukraine. They support the Russian position. J.D. Vance clearly stated that even though he was never in Ukraine, he never traveled to Ukraine, but he saw stories, he saw videos, and apparently his sofa is the best observation point from where he can literally see what happens in Ukraine very, very clearly, without even coming here and without even sending some kind of representatives. Keith Kellogg, I don't want to mention this person at all. So all this, in my personal opinion, was literally a staged event, staged attack on President Zelensky. The agreement, of course, was not signed. It was canceled. So we will see.
Thank you for your response, Starsky. Let's go with Terrell.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Rick's sentiments, but here's the most critical thing. I spend a lot of time talking to U.S. audiences about Ukraine, and this time more than ever is really critical for Americans to understand why U.S. dollars are going to support Ukraine. It's very critical that Americans outside of the Beltway of Washington, D.C. and the think tank community understand what it means for American security interest to support Ukraine. And some of the biggest advocates are in the opposition party, i.e. you have the Representative Jasmine Crockett's of the world who are doing that work that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance ought to be doing, but they aren't doing. And so I think that even though Zelensky very valiantly stood up for Ukraine, I think that his people should be proud of him, it's actually very damaging because what Trump did was say, what he basically played for his audience, I'm going to stand up to these people who are stealing from us, right? And so the way that J.D. Vance in particular, the way that he has been talking about Ukrainians has been pretty xenophobic, to be quite frank with you. It's very xenophobic.
Right.
And the ways that Trump and Vance speak about immigrants, for example, the only thing that's missing with the Ukrainians is the racism, right? But all of the ways that he others Ukraine, he's used his language towards everyone else. And so at least when you had a Biden administration, you had somebody who morally stood in the right path for Ukraine. But what we're going to be dealing with now in these 4 years is an information gap from the most powerful place in the world, which is the White House. And I think that Zelensky, who is a masterful orator and a masterful communicator, he's going to have to do a double job of that and pointing towards Europe and figuring out ways to communicate with the American public, because the White House is no longer going to be doing that work for him. And I do think the White House could have done a better job on this as well, much better job. And I've said this when I was at their security, when I was invited to speak and provide my own assessments of what's been going on here. But yeah, Zelensky has an even bigger job on his hands as far as being a communicator, because he's not going to get it from the most powerful place in the world. But I think he's up to the task, albeit it'll be, a David and Goliath type of challenge.
Thank you for your response there, Terrell. Let's go, Macer.
Better get my microphone back on.
You're good.
No, I think I share everyone's just shock at what happened. I don't know whether it was a setup. I don't know whether it was just Vance bringing some lack of class and utter ignorance into the center of American democracy and disgracing his office in the process. But I just think it was just an act of profound ignorance. And just as Zelensky said recently, both of them exist in a disinformation bubble. They have promised or overpromised the American people that, firstly, this war would never have happened had Trump been the president of the United States, but also that a deal will be done quickly and everything else. And it's quite clear that Donald Trump is starting to realize how difficult this peace process is. He's getting a lot of flack from his allies. He had Starmer in just yesterday. And I think he's starting to realize that he's overpromising and going to underdeliver. He needs to blame somebody. So just to inform that sort of idea that this might have been a setup, is the idea that they want to blame Zelensky. They want him to be seen as the guy who is jeopardizing the deal that Donald Trump thinks is so close to his fingertips. And I just think that in doing so, they've actually, as I said, disgraced their office. And maybe, hopefully, it will wake the American public up a little bit. If you vote for a hillbilly, you'll get a hillbilly. If you vote for a sexual deviant who's not that good a business person, he's been bankrupt so many times, and it's very easy to make a fortune when your dad gives you $1 billion. It's just outrageous that they were elected in the first place. But hopefully, people will start to wake up. And also us in Europe too, that we actually also inoculate ourselves against this American Trumpism, this new world order that they're trying to put together, and actually start investing in our military. That's shame on us, don't get me wrong. But there's so much I want to say about this, but I think I'll let someone else take over.
And you'll have more opportunity to say more. Philip?
Well, I'm struck by when I saw it, and I've been thinking about this in the run-up to this meeting in the Oval and Zelensky's trip to D.C. I've had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach about it. But what strikes me is that there might be a backlash. It might be counterproductive for Trump and ultimately Putin as well, because this is the exact wrong way to approach the president of Ukraine. If he knew anything about Ukraine at all, or J.D. Vance, this was and maybe it was purposeful to be counterproductive. You know, maybe they purposefully scuttled it. But my, you know, I think those of you who are art lovers may know the famous painting by Ilya Repin, the Zaporozhian Cossacks' response to the Sultan, in which they basically, when you try to pressure a Ukrainian into you know, surrendering, you basically get in response a torrent of abuse. And the other thing that's important to mention before I step on again, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, more, is that DC needs to know, Trump needs to know, and frankly, I think Brussels needs to understand that there was a sea change moment in Maidan in 2014, and this country will never be a colony again. That mindset is gone. They will never replace Moscow with DC. So they will not be dictated to. This is no longer a colony of some other greater power. And today's events in the Oval just showed that they have no idea who they're dealing with when it comes to the people of Ukraine and their president.
Thank you, Phil. John?
Yeah, I would like to first echo what Phil. I agree with what everyone said so far, but with what Philip said is very important. Ukraine is a 1,600-year-old proud nation of warriors, of artists, of musicians, of compassionate and beautiful people, and they're not going to be turned into the Belgian Congo. They're not going to be colonized. They're not going to be treated like the French treated Haiti. That's not going to happen. And you're certainly not going to go in there and, like J.D. Vance tried to today, and humiliate President Zelensky. I first wanted to just say that what happened today is disgusting. It was a disgrace to everything that we're supposed to stand for as a country. You know, we're the first nation founded upon an ideal or on an idea. And, you know, we lost that today if we haven't lost it already. And, you know, Zelensky, first of all, did nothing wrong. I believe that was an ambush. I mean, it's unprecedented to have a vice president sitting on the couch, putting his finger, a man who's never been to Ukraine, putting his finger in President Zelensky's face. You know, President Zelensky, who's seen dead children, who's seen Bucha, who's seen Mariupol, who's seen Izium, and who has seen the little chairs they have for little toddlers and when they have to go in the subways in Kyiv from a missile attack. What he's been through, no human being on what he's been through could tolerate being talked to like that and being treated like that. And it's just felt to me like a setup. And he didn't do anything wrong. He tried to be placating. He tried to be nice, you know, but he also has to stand his ground. I mean, the most important thing for me, as I understand, having, you know, I'm not Ukrainian in my limited time there, year and a half or so, you know, it's pretty quick. You can pretty quickly understand that the morale of the people and the morale of the soldiers is critically important. And I don't think Zelensky had to stick up for the Ukrainian people, for the soldiers, and not let Zelensky or not let J.D. Vance put his finger in his face and tell him that he doesn't have enough soldiers. They let Trump tell him about his military when neither of them have ever been there, and neither of them have ever been under the fire of combat and understand what's going on. And he had to stick up for his people, man. Like, what else was he supposed to do? I think it would have been very damaging for the morale of the people and the soldiers if he had just sat there and just took that abuse from them and that humiliation. And another thing, Brian Glenn, Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend, asked him this ridiculous question to start, and he said, and that's how in other words he knows the setup. He said the first question the journalist asked was, why aren't you wearing a suit? When Elon Musk is in there with his little kid putting boogers on the desk with no suit on all the time, you know? So no place to do it. As an American, I'm responsible for my country, even though I didn't vote for Donald Trump, and it's our obligation to fix it. So, yeah, that's what I got to say.
Thank you, John. Dylan?
So can I also just one second? Let me turn up the volume on my mic. I think my mic's having problems. What sounds better here?
Oh, you're good. You're loud and clear for us.
I'm loud and clear. Okay,
oh, yeah.
I'll just talk loudly and hope my chat hears me. So, the first thing I wanted to say is about that not wearing suit thing. Zelensky's answered this question time and time and time again. He's wearing this outfit in order to remind people that he's leading the country at war, right? Because it's not the same it was in 2011 as it is in Ukraine now. The same roles as the leader isn't the same. So he's going to wear a different outfit to try to show that his country's at war symbolically. He's answered this question a million times. The only reason someone would ask him that question is to start shit. Mm-hmm. The only reason. There's not like a journalistic integrity reason. I mean, like if I was to go to Donald Trump and say, were you a businessman? I'm not asking that question because I need to know that. Everyone knows that. You can go just there's a million different times Zelensky's answered that question. So that leads me to believe that these questions, definitely considering who it's coming from, Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend, the same woman who said that the Ukrainians are harvesting the organs of babies and then selling them in order to make money to keep the war going. This is the type of stuff that's getting pumped up from that family. That's the first person asking Zelensky a question when he's having a meeting with the president of the United States. Okay, so I was never very hopeful about Trump, particularly being an ally of Ukraine. This is somebody who has no ideological dedication to concepts of liberal democracy. This is somebody who called for the suspension of the U.S. Constitution once he lost an election. This is somebody who has not shown any respect for the checks and balances or to the courts or to these institutions. And when these institutions check him, he tries to barrel over them. And so I don't think he cares about, say, Ukraine's democratization or Ukraine civil society or Ukraine be able to have elections or Ukraine being Ukraine. I mean, I remember Trump saying a month ago, maybe Ukraine will be Ukraine, maybe Ukraine will be Russia. I don't know. We'll have to see how it plays out in order to scare the Ukrainians into thinking, look, if you don't work with us, then there won't be any Ukraine left. So this isn't somebody with no humanitarian dedication, with no democratic dedication. And so the only way you were ever going to work with Trump is by making a deal with him where you offered him enough that could benefit himself, some quid pro quo. That's why the only reason I think Trump was ever somewhat positive towards Zelensky is because he kept his mouth shut when he was getting strong-armed during Trump's first term for the weapons. But at the end of the day, if he goes to Washington, D.C., and they start lying about the war right in front of him, and it's the president and the vice president basically going back and forth, taking turns slapping Ukraine in the face, telling them, that they basically need their support, they need this, you're going to be following the rules by XYZ way, we're not going to include you in the negotiations. I don't know what response anyone could have expected. I really don't know what response Zelensky could have given than bloodying their nose when they lie about the war. How could he have gone back to his own people and said, yes, they lied about the guys who were dying on the front line. Yes, they lied about the casualty numbers. Yes, they lied about the aid numbers. Yes, they said this. Yes, they said that. And I just sat there and said nothing, kept my mouth shut, and let him spill narratives out to the public that are completely not true. If he was to do that, he would be showing himself to be weak, and I think they would smell blood in the water. And I think that Malcolm Turnbull's strategy of blooding Putin's nose, standing up to him, making clear what you're blooding Putin's nose, blooding Trump's nose, Freudian slip, making sure that he, understands where your interests lie. That's the only way he's going to ever respect your interests, is if you straight up say, this is what I care about. I will fight tooth and nail for it. There's nothing you can do to push me off of it. That's how the Mexicans were able to get a victory early on in this administration. That's how the Canadians were able to avoid tariffs. And that's how Zelensky was able to avoid the $500 billion strong arming that Donald Trump was trying to do earlier on. So right now, I know it feels really bad, but also we saw Trump go from Zelensky's a dictator to, oh, I asked him that, I had no idea, to now they're both like lambasting him on the couch. It could be a week and Trump could flip-flop again. And this is the danger of Trump, that even if we got an agreement with him and we got him on our side, if the Russians offer him double the resources the Ukrainians have, he's going to be tempted to backstab them.
Very good points. Oh, go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, Andrew, if I can just follow up on what Dylan just said there, because it's an important point worth making, is the fact that this is an existential fight for Ukraine and for Ukrainians. They're not going to stop fighting, even if they, because of withdrawal of U.S. support. All that's going to mean is more Ukrainians are going to die, and I take no pleasure in saying that. The reason why I think it's worth noting is because are we now, as Americans, going to sit and watch as the casualty numbers increase, as more territory potentially will be taken because of the lack of support and ammo and arms? How is that going to go down in America? And I've said this since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. The question of supporting Ukraine is not a matter of can we support them in such a way that the war ends, because they're going to keep fighting no matter what. The question we have in terms of what do we give in support of Ukraine is how many more Ukrainians will have to die before the ultimate result, and that is the inevitable victory of Kyiv, because the Russians don't have the capacity to do what they need to do politically. But that's maybe for a topic down the road here. I think it's just worth mentioning that all this is going to do is cause more Ukrainian deaths, and the Americans and the American public are going to sit and watch from the sidelines now, because they are going to be relegated to the sidelines by Trump's own actions as Ukrainians die and as more alliances and partners in Europe start to step away from them. I think this is going to be a really bad outcome for Trump, because I think public opinion is going to get really incensed.
Yeah, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it all across the internet right now. Widespread pushback. I mean, it's just been days of bad things for Trump domestically, but now this is massive. But let's another question for all of you. We'll go around. We'll start with Macer. What happens next? No mineral deal was signed, right? No agreement. Zelensky goes back. Rhetoric from Trump. What happens next?
Well, what I hope happens next is that Europe wakes up to a new reality, that the United States has elected a populist that is a complete isolationist, has a very different vision for America. It is very hard to read. I mean, the idea that the United States would want to pivot to Asia is perfectly understandable. The trouble is, you can, I think the expression someone used recently was, you can walk along and blow your nose at the same time. Like America, the idea that America can't support Ukraine because of its increasing aspirations to assert itself in other parts of the world is just absolutely ridiculous. America is still a very powerful, competent nation if it believes in itself and actually has a plan that it can follow through with. But Donald Trump's actions are just almost very difficult to read. Like everything from the whole sort of the Panama thing, the Greenland, should we make Canada a state? I was trying to read it. I was trying to logically put it together. And I thought maybe potentially what a genius move it would be to threaten to invade Greenland, to suddenly shake the Europeans. It would be quite an amusing thing to do, to get them, to force them to increase their military budget. But what he's doing aren't just amusing Donald Trump being Donald Trump anymore. He is now not only demeaning his office by trying to humiliate a nation at war, a nation that has shown itself to the whole world of its extreme bravery and has got so much support in America and Europe and everywhere else. That's not only is he doing that, but he's feeding 100% and supporting the Russian and Chinese aspirations for the globe. It's the whole idea, and I've said this before, the idea that China and Russia want to have a balkanized world. They call it a multipolar world of regional powers. The day of the United States being the sole superpower of the world is over, according to Vladimir Putin. The trouble is, you've got the president of the United States agreeing with him, literally rolling back and going to isolationism. Winston Churchill said famously, if he ever had to choose between Europe and the open sea, he'd always choose the open sea. The idea, the point he was making was that Britain gets its power by looking outwards. America gets its power by looking outwards, by engaging with the world and fighting on all fronts. If it rolls back and surrenders territory to fight somewhere else, you're just losing. It's not a coherent strategy. And this is what we're faced with. We're faced with a blundering idiot that makes ridiculous statements, but who also now increasingly and quite obviously is getting everything wrong in every single sense of the word. So, again, I could keep going, but I hope Europe wakes up to this new reality, invests, and if I'm honest, I hope we actually double down in Ukraine. I think what could happen actually is technically it depends on if Europe has balls, and hopefully they do. That this brings us actually closer to war, not further away, because what I would like to see, my instinct, is that Europe, Britain, etc., doubles down in Ukraine and actually starts confronting Russia. Every time they escalate, we should escalate as well. We've got nuclear weapons as well. And I don't want to sound too bombastic. I don't want to sound unreasonable, but at the same time, we can't live in a world where Russia feels like it can invade a sovereign country, take huge parts of it, and the superpower of the world, the country we've always looked to as a source of inspiration, of culture, and of leadership on the world stage, is now surrendering that leadership, and Russia is benefiting from this invasion, with China threatening Taiwan, with Iran threatening the region in the Middle East, we are at a very dangerous crossroads. There are other things as well, including the effects of climate change, increasing poverty around the world, the effects of technology, AI, etc. All these things will play a huge part in our future. And the idea that Donald Trump in the United States is not taking a leadership role right now is just absolutely ridiculous, and it infuriates me. But there we go.
Thank you so much for your detailed response, Macer. Starsky, what happens next?
Yeah, I completely agree with Macer. What happens next? Let's see what is happening now. And now we can see that Trump is absolutely successfully sowing discord between the NATO allies, and he's sowing discord, trying to disrupt the unity in the Western world, and we will only see more of that in the future. Again, European nations slowly start to understand that this man will not help them if something happens. He will not help them defend against Russia, because generally speaking, Trump never considered Russians a threat, invaders, for different reasons, right? I have never heard, again, everything is based on the narratives. I have never heard him like speaking the facts about Russia, speaking the facts about Russian aggression, again, about their atrocities. He only learned last week that there are actually 20,000 Ukrainian children that were kidnapped and deported by Russians to the territory of Russia. He never heard that. He is, and let's be honest here, he is an enemy of the West at this very point. He's the enemy of the collective West. Let's call him for what he is. And in my opinion, next, as I already said, we will see probably lifting sanctions between this, because this is something that Russia really needs at this point. They're losing money. They need more finances because they're spending approximately 1/3 of their budget funding the war that they've started. And they need more resources, more money, more abilities to buy different electronic parts for their missiles and their drones. So in my opinion, this is something that we will see soon. The problem that the European countries are facing now is that they will have to probably not double down, but triple down on supporting Ukraine and defending themselves, because the Russian misinformation will only increase over time, and it will be aimed specifically at European countries, not the US anymore. And we will also see growing cases of Russian sabotage again, because the American intelligence agencies and security agencies are will unlikely to work with European agencies in the nearest future. So what Trump does is basically weakening the collective security, which is like literally what we can see now. Especially considering the closest allies, neighbors like Canada, and he's also weakening the unity within NATO and within European countries. The call that Elon Musk made the other day before the elections took place in Germany, supporting AfD, that is a known extremist party here in Germany, and they are known for harboring Russian spies, Chinese spies. Those spies were exposed and arrested last year in the party, basically in the top management of the party. They will be apparently also supported by Trump administration, like Elon Musk did back a couple of weeks ago. So we will see that maybe Russians will unite. Again, it sounds bad, but I'm trying to be pessimistic realist. I think that United States will try to combine their efforts with the Trump administration to sow even more discord against Europe. That's why European countries are now facing extremely big challenges. So situation is fucked up, but not lost.
Thank you, Starsky. Terrell.
Yeah, so I think Trump's actions should not surprise anyone. His alignment with Putin should come to no surprise for the very simple reason that Putin is a Russian supremacist and Trump is a white supremacist. And so even though his policies are very much they're insulationists, the ideology is very much global, because think about the people that Trump appeals to. It's the Viktor Orbáns of Hungary. It's the AfD of Germany, which came in second place, and they doubled their support. Elon Musk actually used his platform, Twitter, that's known as X, to advocate for the German party. And Twitter, I consider him to be the digital Joseph Goebbels, so to speak, of disinformation in this era. I think in the best case scenario, even if Donald Trump it's going to be his final term, but the political entity of MAGA is now the Republican Party. And so that is not going to change when Trump leaves office, because he is already training J.D. Vance in to take over his spot, which is the reason why he is now vice presidential role. And so one of the things that I talk about to Ukrainians, because I'm often asked, how could this happen to America? America's democratic institutions seem to be so vulnerable. The reality is that they were always vulnerable. And the main reason is that the way that mainstream American political science, the pedagogy of our American institutions have always taught fascism as America through World War II defeated fascism. In reality, my family comes from the South to tell you that their Jim Crow existence was very much fascism, and that really, you talk about the liberal democracy, that really didn't happen in America until 1968, with the passage of the Voter Rights Act, the passage of Fair Housing Act, etc. And so, we look to countries like Ukraine, countries that were formerly colonized by Russia after 1991, getting their independence, that they are new democracies. So is America. So all these things that are happening shouldn't come as no surprise. And one important distinction that I always make, but I don't think people really appreciate it, is that the type of xenophobic treatment that Ukraine is receiving from this far-right leader is a different version of the racism that's directed towards Black people, towards Mexicans, towards Haitians, eating the dogs and cats. The Ukrainians are just getting a different version of it. So in reality, all of us are trying to figure this democracy out, and much of it has to do with America fighting its own internalized fascism in itself. And so what I hope this experience is doing for Ukrainians and Eastern Europeans in particular is that this democracy is very fragile, and that what is happening in Germany is obviously happening in the United States, but it can happen again, because this whole thing is very fragile. We have three branches of government: the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative. MAGA controls executive. They control one half of the legislative, and the only thing that's really holding us together is the judicial. So this is a very tender, vulnerable state of affairs that we are in right now. But the reality is that it's always been that way. And if there's anything to come out of this, I think that if we're thinking about how we could be proactive, and that's what I want to care about when I close out with that, is if we really want to be proactive, we really need to start investing in each other's fights and struggles. I think Ukrainians need to be more mindful of what it means to support other oppressed peoples, what it means like to be in community with them, because we're all fighting the same supremacist beast, because while we are kind of isolationists and fighting our own battles, Trump, Orban, all the far-right leaders are fighting a war, and that war is against all of us of goodwill. And I think that we need to come together and figure out how our battles can culminate into the greater war that's being waged against us.
Thank you so much for the insight there, Terrell. Let's go with John. What happens next?
Yeah, and I'll try to. I mean, these are all great comments, especially Terrell's about how the far right worldwide are joining together.
Yeah,
Look at JD Vance's statement in Munich recently, where you have the largest land war in Europe, and he says the greatest threat is actually, how they regulate social media in Germany. I mean, give me a break. It was crazy and insulting. But so I'm going to try to speak on something a little bit different. I mean, when you look at, I think it's all related. If you look at how USAID was dismantled and America's soft power and its use of good around the world to try to not only get better outcomes, for us at home, but also to try to show American leadership around the world. I mean, that's a metaphor for what's happening. We have our own problems at home. You have Roosevelt and the Office of Management and Budget. You have this Project 2025 plan to essentially dismantle the way that our democracy works and to take money that's actually been allocated by Congress, who controls the power of the purse, and let the president impound that and try and control it and get an argument in a case before the Supreme Court that will make the executive branch have power that was never contemplated by the founders of this country. And that is reflecting worldwide, and we're receding from that. I mean, I think the only way to look at it is the way that, the MERS, who's just elected in Germany, has referred to it. America is the adversary, pure and simple. And right now, what they did to Zelensky and the way they set him up and ambushed him today, and it was an absolute setup. It was the most disgraceful thing, but beyond the emotion of it and how bad it was from our character and our history and what we're supposed to be and the rules-based order we fought for on Normandy and Bastogne in Iwo Jima is what it reflects for the future, and that Europe is on its own. But Europe should embrace that, okay? When you look at the gross domestic product, if you add up the EU, Japan, South Korea, these are the countries that are going to have to lead. And they're also the parts of the world that can no longer rely upon the United States. And that's the main thing, two things I want to say: nuclear proliferation, and also what it means for not trusting the United States and relying upon yourself. This today, if it hadn't already happened, was the absolute death of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. You cannot rely upon the United States. In the Budapest Memorandum, it gets forgotten in everything. Trump thinks we owe, Ukraine should pay the money that was paid to Ukraine in the aid and the old equipment in this war, which is about $60-something billion. Well, first of all, that was a grant. It was not a loan, number one. Number two, that money was owed to Ukraine under security guarantees signed in 1994 when they gave up the third largest nuclear arsenal. And that is so forgotten. And Zelensky was talking about that before this thing blew up, because Trump and Vance didn't want to hear those relevant facts, those controlling facts. And if Ukraine put its neck on the line, its future on the line, and there's a great video of Bill Clinton, I'm going to have that pinned in my on my Twitter feed, where he expresses the guilt of getting the Ukrainians to give up their nuclear weapons. And they said, can we rely upon you? Can we trust you? If we give these up and you don't help us protect ourselves, you don't give us weapons, they're going to invade again. They've been doing it for centuries. And, I think if you're South Korea right now, if you're NATO, I don't believe, just imagine this question gets asked to Donald Trump tomorrow, and tell me what his answer is going to be. If some reporter says, Mr. President, you have an America First foreign policy, and, we've been in South Korea for like 70 years, way longer than we're in Afghanistan and Iraq. And, we don't get anything from that, and it doesn't benefit us. And you have these great relations with the elected president of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. I mean, why are we there? What are we getting out of it? When are you going to stop letting them freeload and bring our troops home? Can you imagine that question being asked? And he's not going to be able to help himself because it pulls all his triggers, right? And South Korea, you're on your own, except with respect to the United States, you're on your own, but you've got friends in Ukraine, you've got friends in Europe, and that in Japan, in facing China, Taiwan facing China, South Korea facing North Korea and China, it is those people in Europe have got to come together in unprecedented ways. And now Poland has a very great, very substantial defense relationship with the South Koreans. The South Koreans have amazing armor, tanks, artillery, and multiple launch rocket systems, and huge, heavy payload ballistic missiles. I mean, you get the economic power and the industrial might of like Samsung and Hyundai, and which built everything from huge ships to tanks and everything else. We've got to come together. That has got to be, NATO is dead. I would not trust I would not trust Trump to honor Article 5 for a moment right now, because why would he? Paper agreements mean nothing. And that's been proven by their actions. And so I think that's something to look forward to. I mean, now, as far as like what will happen with U.S.-Ukraine relations, Trump issued a statement afterwards saying, Zelensky can come back when he's ready for peace. So that left that little door open. I don't know what that means. Okay. And we'll just have to see, but the defense industrial base in Ukraine's been building up. Rheinmetall stock's going to go up, but you're on your own, and that's you can't trust anything. And America's the enemy. We have a very interesting budget fight coming up on March 14th, when the current continuing resolution expires in December. When the last time they passed one of those, 30 Republicans voted against it, and they just barely passed a budget that cut $800 billion. And now this is just a budget outline, what was passed like 2 days ago in the House. Okay, so it's just a framework. It doesn't set. That's not the real fight. It's like an agreement to negotiate whatever on the budget. But they're going to have to find $800 billion to cut from Medicare and Medicaid, and they've got all these things they're trying to do to fund tax cuts for people making over $400,000 a year. And if the Democrats please hold together, do not cross the aisle. This is the last time we're going to have this leverage. Make them govern, because they will not be able to. And if there's a shutdown, hey, at least it's going to stop Elon Musk from being able to destroy the government as fast as he is, because that's what he's doing right now. It's so bad in this country. I think a shutdown is actually a protective mechanism, almost like a patient going into a coma when he has a brain injury. We may need that. So that's what I'm looking forward to, internationally and domestically.
Thank you, John. Before we get to Phil and Dylan on their take, I want to make sure we give a moment for Terrell. He has to bounce out really quick. So final thoughts, Terrell, and how everybody can subscribe to you and follow you.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you all so very much. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about the country that we all love. So if any of you all want to continue to follow me, I'm on social media, or particularly Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. You can follow me on my name, Terrell J. Starr. I'm rebranding all of my social media platforms under Worldwise, and you'll see that branding next week under my social media platform. So it's basically, you can just follow me there. My final thoughts are, I believe that we all need to come together proactively and help communicate to our fellow Americans the importance of Ukraine. I mean, I heard the Budapest memorandum. Every day I spend time with people explaining what this means, and also there is something about teaching Americans about what it means to be global citizens. And so many of us, when we have these conversations, we obviously on this stream understand the role of America in the world, but too many of our fellow U.S. citizens don't understand what it means for the fact that we have the most powerful military in human history, and what are our responsibilities and being proactive to ensure that safety that our military provides is maintained, and also the diplomacy aspect of it. And you certainly don't get that by watching Trump's very childish and boorish behavior. And so I think I would encourage all of us to kind of really think about, how are we getting in further touch with our fellow American citizens and teaching them the importance of Ukraine, because this fascist and cheap in the White House certainly is not. Thank you all so very much. And my man, Andrew, I got your mic from the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It is right here at my desk. When you come to Ukraine in May, I will be here. I will give it to you, my man.
Thank you so much, Terrell. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for giving your expertise to the panel, and I can't wait to talk again.
Same again.
All right. Peace. All right. Starsky, do you have a moment of time for another question after this, or do you have to sign out now?
Yeah, sure. I have several minutes, and
okay.
Then
So let's get Phil and Dylan, and then I'll start the second round of questions, and I'll start with you, Starsky, and then we'll sign you out after that. All right. So what happens next? Let's go Phil and then Dylan.
Sure, and I'll be relatively quick. First and foremost, I think not just today's events, but everything that's been leading up to it since Trump returned to the presidency, the mask is off. I don't think anybody can deny that the president of the United States is compromised by the Kremlin. Whether it's, I don't know to what degree, but the sheer fact of today's events, the vote in the UN refusing to support that resolution condemning Russia as the aggressor, the fact that he's been saying attacking President Zelensky and basically parroting Kremlin talking points, even if he didn't mean it, even if it was some sort of negotiation ploy, it doesn't matter. The president of the United States sitting in the Oval Office supporting the dictator Putin is enough for me, and I think many Americans, to recognize that something's wrong here. And we basically have a president who is more aligned with Putin than our liberal democracy Western allies. I think that's problematic, and I think there's increasingly going to be people who recognize that there is something going on here that's not right. As far as the immediate ramification of this, of course, America might start to completely withdraw its support. For us, what that means is on the front lines, they won't be getting long-range artillery, ATACMS, or HIMARS. They won't have the ability to fire with them because there won't be coordination with American GPS systems, satellite imagery. That's going to be problematic for the front line. But here off the front line, where we have had good air defense, we're going to start to see more casualties, sadly, in places like Kyiv, or even out west in Lviv or Lutsk or Ivano-Frankivsk, because we won't have quite the air defense that we have. I think they will increase in their capacity, but it's not going to happen immediately. And further to that point, I think that the very real possibility that Musk shuts off Starlink, which is so important for, say, drone warfare, that's a very real possibility coming down the pipeline. Although the Ukrainians have already said that they have been setting up alternatives, but in the immediate clicking off of Starlink, there's going to be some problems. They might lose some more territory, and again, air defense. We're gonna feel it here in Kyiv. Ultimately, however, when you're looking longer term, the Russians don't have the capacity to do what they need to do. The Russians' true objective here, it's all about their projected their sense of self as empire. They cannot restore their empire here because they will not be able to take Kyiv. They will not be able to change the government here. And secondarily, and equally as important for them projecting their imperial power, they do not have dominion over the Black Sea. So again, bigger picture, they can't do what they need to do. And ultimately, Putin could be in real serious trouble because he has damaged so much of the legacy of all of Russian history, whether it's Peter or Catherine, taking the North Shore of the Black Sea, or, take your pick. There's so many things that he has betrayed. He's on a tenuous point. And if Trump throws him a lifeline by lifting sanctions, it'll only increase what I originally said to answer this question, and that is Americans are going to start to wake up more and more to the fact that Trump is aligned with Putin, and I don't think they're going to like that. And a final point, just to second what Mercer was saying there, I think Europe is going to find a backbone. I think they are going to step up. The problem is they need to find a way, and quick, to speak as a unified voice, and they need to get their industry spending, their military spending up real quick. We got about a year, I think, where of defenses that Ukraine can put in the field against Russia, but unless the Europeans get moving real quick with decisive action, we're going to have a lot more problems. Ultimately, though, I still believe in Ukrainian victory.
Thank you, Phil. Dylan?
Okay, I'm sorry, Starsky. I hope I don't take too long. I know you're waiting. So first off, I just want to say Trump's not negotiating on the Ukraine side. He's negotiating on his own side. You might be able to, if you're very nice to him and generous, you might be able to say he's negotiating on his country's side by trying to get resources out of Ukraine, or trying to get investment deals with Russia. But the way that Biden approached it, and I was not a huge fan of Biden's approach to the war in Ukraine, but the way he approached it when he came to negotiating was, when we have negotiations, will back up Ukraine at the negotiating table, will add to their leverage, will add to their power, which will then allow them to have a stronger negotiating position. This is the exact opposite of Trump's position. Trump's position is, I'll see if I can drag both of these guys to the table and see if I can get them to make a deal, because I made a 24-hour promise that was never deliverable, that was never actionable, that was a campaign promise that could never be delivered, but now I need to deliver something. And so now he's trying to create a unstable peace out of an unstable situation where we haven't really come to terms and to build a foundation for long-term peace, because he wants to fulfill this campaign promise. And if the war starts again when he's not in office, I genuinely do not believe he cares. As long as it doesn't hurt his legacy, as long as it doesn't hurt his influence, if it starts under a Democrat, that just means it's another attack avenue. And if you think I'm being too partisan, that's why I'm so cynical on this, and, my partisanship is bleeding in, I would like to point to you guys to Trump's blocking of Ukrainian aid during the Battle of Avdiivka, which lasted for like 5 or 6 months and got thousands of people killed. So if you think he's too cynical to try to use these lives for political purposes, I have to disagree with you. I also locally, I live in the Maryland area. I saw as the Reagan National Airport, that's the airport I traveled to Ukraine from, as that plane went down, crashed, killed a bunch of people, locals from my area, and his immediate response when we found out it was like a military helicopter was, I don't know, maybe it was the black women, maybe it was the DEI, maybe it was the diversity. And my point isn't to lambast about DI or whatever. My point is to say that he will use tragedy immediately for political purposes if he can. And so the idea that he wouldn't do this because he's above it, I disagree. Also, I just want to put forward that I don't think that we're going to get any sense from Trump's peacemaking. One thing I noticed that seemed to not get picked up as much by the media is that during the back and forth, they talked a lot about security guarantees. And then Trump said, and this on its face should discredit Trump, we'll get the security guarantees after we make peace. We'll get the security guarantees after we come to an agreement with the Russians. What a preposterously stupid fucking thing to say. The type of thing that if you heard a staffer intern who's keeping notes on the meeting with the Russians say that out loud, you'd fire them and fire anybody else who's related to them, because you wouldn't even want the blood from their family in your negotiating team, let alone the person leading the whole thing, when he's saying, oh, we'll get security guarantees after everything's said and done and we have no leverage. It's ridiculous. It's silly on its face. Also, be more respectful. I just wanted to go back to that for a second. There's be more respectful claim from JD Vance. Donald Trump called Zelensky a dictator the week before. They lie every single day about death numbers, about aid numbers, about how the war started, what were the motivations behind the Russians, how trustable Putin is. Trump says that you can trust Putin, trust them so much that you don't need security guarantees to make peace with them. That is something you have to call out. It isn't disrespectful to call it out because you're calling out a direct threat to your people. And if the president of the Ukrainian nation cannot call out threats to the Ukrainian people because their allies don't like it, then you need to question, is that an ally? Is it an ally that would be angry about me calling out threats to the Ukrainian people, calling out that we need security guarantees to stop this from happening again? Or is it the same duplicitousness that led to the backstabbing after the Budapest Memorandum? The idea that it was a memorandum instead of an agreement or an alliance or a treaty, so that they allowed that wiggle room. That same duplicitousness, I think, is deeply in Trump's foreign policy. I have a bunch of other stuff I do want to say, but I'm just going to keep it written down because I want Starsky to be able to, go get a coffee, or I don't know. It's Friday afternoon. I don't know if he's got, a good party later. Coffee. He's got to go drink some coffee.
He's got work with UATV to get done too in the background. So that brings us to our next topic, and then Starsky we'll have you answer, and then of course thank you so much for your time with us in the panel. Let's shift to the realities on the ground. The war has evolved dramatically over the past 3 years. Operator Starsky, you started as an infantry NCO before becoming a press officer. How has your experience on the front lines shaped the way you report on the war and communicate with both Ukrainian and international audiences?
brought shape dramatically because when I became a volunteer, first in the Police Special Force Battalion in 2015, and later in the National Guard as an infantry, the experience was completely different. Before that, I worked in the communications, and my whole life was related to writing press announcements, press releases, doing all kinds of press events, and working with the media and yada yada. I was of course terrified to go to war as a human being, but at the same time I was secretly happy that I don't have to deal with all that media related crap anymore. But then 2018, when I became a press officer, it changed a bit. I felt kind of, you know, when you are in the company, okay, as an NCO, and then you get promoted and commissioned as an officer, it always feels as if you're betraying your boys. So I tried to stick with my boys as much as I could, and I would make a lot of footage with them and yada yada. But then when the full-scale invasion began, and basically it didn't matter much if you were a press officer of an infantry. After the Battle of Hostomel, we had a platoon formed literally out of staff officers of my brigade to fight in the area of Irpin, Bucha. So it didn't matter much, but that was again a shift, because I started communicating with the international community, and I can tell you this. Even despite the fact that it was an absolutely atrocious period of our time, atrocious war that came to Ukraine. Not Ukraine came to Russia, but the war came from Russia to Ukraine, which is something that Trump will never admit. Even despite that fact, I realized that we have enormous support around the world, and enormous support from decent people who not only write commentaries, write questions, ask how's things in there, but also come to Ukraine, try to do something on the ground, or join International Legion, or join the brigades. We had the Aussie Viking, first, I would say, international volunteer fighting in my brigade since the very first days, because he came to Hostomel early in the morning, and boom, there's Russian helicopters. So Aussie Viking, hopefully we will make an interview with him, you know, in the observable future. So to me personally, it changed big time. My combat experience, of course, cannot be really compared between 2015 and 2022. To what was happening after 2022, because that war was absolutely different, even though we had artillery firing at us, we had tank combat, we had Russian attacks involving armored vehicles and tanks, and all kinds of multiple launch rocket systems and things like that. But of course, the scale was absolutely different. The specific of that war was absolutely different, and the international support was absolutely different. So it was, you know, there was Donetsk airport, the heroic history of defending of this airport that lasted for 242 days, officially, unofficially a bit longer. And I know the guys from the airport, the guys who defended the airport during those days, and they said that, oh boy, after we saw what was happening in like Rubizhne 2022, that looks to me like, you know, a cruise on a ship with a champagne. So the difference is, of course, tremendous, and we can see that the situation is changing every single month, not only on the ground itself, but also in terms of politics, in terms of what happens on the international stage. We will be talking and discussing this this day, I think, for the next week, Totally. Yeah, but generally, guys, I need to run. Unfortunately, I have several tasks and my deadlines are burning. I would like to say thanks to the panel. It's a pleasure to see you, my friends. Big thanks to Andrew Mercado, my bro, who invited me here. Big thanks to everybody in the chat. Always a pleasure to see you guys. A lot of names that I saw back in 2022 in the chat, I can see today, and of course, it's a big, big support. One thing I wanted to mention real quick, we see a lot of messages in the chat, in the commentaries everywhere, coming kinda from European countries saying, I'm not gonna buy anything coming from the United States. United States must be thrown away from the United Nations and yada, yada. So Russians are trying to sow discord regardless if Trump is there or not. And you should always remember that United States is a nation, and roughly half of American citizens, I believe even more according to the polls that were published last year, support Ukraine, and they still support democracy. A lot of Republicans, a lot of Republican representatives in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, they still support Ukraine, and we should always remember to about this very, very important thing, to have respect towards other people. It's not the Americans to blame for what is happening. There is literally, as with the situation with Russia, where, yeah, let's admit there's a lot of atrocious people, but if Putin didn't happen, the war would not happen. Same here with Trump. So guys, stay positive as much as it's possible in this current situation. Stick together, because good guys gotta stick together and stand for each other. So big thanks and respect to you, my friends.
Thank you so much, Starsky. More panels to come in the future, especially with you involved. Thank you so much for your time today. All right, thank you, Starsky. All right, again, guys, that's Operator Starsky on YouTube. You guys can go and subscribe to his channel. Macer, you have fought against ISIS and have served in Ukraine. How does Ukraine's resistance compare to other conflicts, and what makes it unique?
It compares in many ways in terms of the human element of it, i.e., Ukraine is a beautiful nation. It's a nation with a long history. It was talked about at the very beginning of this conversation. In fact, there's some beautiful books out there, one called The Gateway to Europe, which I think really just shows off the impact that Ukrainian art, culture, language, and everything else hopefully will have on Europe after this war. I genuinely think that through all this trauma, hopefully the longer term plan after victory is secured is that Ukraine will join the international community as a truly sovereign country, free from the odious and insidious grip of Russia's gangsterism that's plagued them for so long. When it comes to the human element of every different war zones, in Syria I saw just ordinary people, Kurds, Yazidis, Arabs, Christians, all the rest of it coming together, working together with the SDF, fighting back against ISIS. They had a common enemy, an enemy in the area that I fought, because obviously there were two wars going on at the same time in Syria when I was there. The FSA Assad war in and around Damascus and Aleppo, and the sort of SDF ISIS war going on in the east. Now, America was on the right side of history there, although they did drop the ball a few times, to say the least, but we won't go there. But either way, they supported local people in defeating ISIS, and they won. They defeated the Islamic State militarily. Obviously, the vicious ideology will be much harder to defeat, and it's something that will be present in not just in Syria, but in the region for many years to come. In Ukraine, again, it's ordinary people coming together and fighting back. When I was in Kyiv, when the war broke out, after sort of 3 or 4 days, the Russians were sort of encircling the city. You could hear, even from the center of town, from Independence Square, you could hear the bombs in the distance and everything else. And I went to a recruitment center in the southern part of the city, where it was in sort of, I won't describe the venue in too much detail, just in case there's some sort of security concern there. But either way, a load of military vehicles were there. They were offloading these weapons in these big boxes, big Soviet-style crates, just handing weapons to thousands of people, queues of people, and it was amazing. People were in a hodgepodge of uniforms. Some people were literally had arrived in their work in overalls from work. Some people were just in jeans. Others were in full battle gear. Some of them were wearing their stuff that they were issued probably when they were conscripted, like 20 years ago or whatever. A guy with a motorcycle helmet was walking around as well. And they were arming themselves and then going off to the front line. I'm an internationalist. I'm a humanist. The very purpose for me to fight is because I want to be in solidarity with people. Because, the fascism and fanaticism that Vladimir Putin represents, this sort of imperial sort of desire to regrow the Russian Empire and reestablish it, is very similar to the fanaticism that underpins ISIS in many ways, although obviously theirs has the religious element rather than the nationalistic one. So from a human perspective, they're very similar stories. And I feel the same way about the Ukrainian conflict as I do about the sort of the Kurdish and the Syrian one. When it comes to the scope of the conflict, obviously they're vastly different and you can't compare them by any metric. I thought it was horrendous in Syria. I lost, I know personally, probably 100 people that died there. We lost hundreds and hundreds of people every sort of week. In the entire conflict, I believe about 12,000 SDF fighters were killed. Many more Islamic State fighters were killed. I was working as a medic for much of the time as well, treating people, and it was just horrendous seeing the conflict and participating in that conflict. But then you compare that to Ukraine, where 12,000 people will die in just a few days, in a week, sort of thing. I'm talking about Russian and Ukrainian now. So they're vastly different. It's an industrial war. This kind of war that we haven't seen in Europe since the Second World War. I know that's been repeated a lot. The first thing that I was blown away by was just the amount of artillery. In Syria, we were mortared all the time, and we had there was a huge problem with IEDs. A lot of my friends were killed. I was several times. I was next to people who were blown up by them, whereas in Ukraine you can't, like, it's the front line is unsurvivable unless you're under the ground. So it's completely different and actually a lot more terrifying because of that. In Syria I was often close to the enemy, like a kilometer away from ISIS, but I might as well have been I was so happy. You'd be drinking Pepsi, talking to your mates, all the rest of it. Maybe a single mortar will go over, whatever. Someone will scream there's a car bomb, maybe like a kilometer away before we move down. In Ukraine, there's no peace. You don't get peace. Certainly on everyone talks about the zero line. The zero line to me is the no man's land between our positions and the Russians. And that zone is hellish. And even 10 kilometers up to that, or 5 kilometers, certainly 5 kilometers up to that, is also hellish because you're going to get hit by FPVs and all the rest of it. So, yeah, very different conflicts, but similar on a human level.
Thank you so much for your detailed answer, Macer. John Jackson, as a U.S. veteran who fought Ukraine, what role do foreign fighters play in this conflict? What are their biggest challenges?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd like to echo what Macer said about one thing real quick, and that is kind of where Ukraine is now, where they came from, just real quick. You know, Anne Applebaum, who's a very well-known, she lives in Poland. I believe she's married to the Polish foreign minister, but is an expert on dictatorships and authoritarian regimes. And she was interviewed by Bill Kristol recently on the Bulwark about in remembrance of the third anniversary. And if you go back to remember where Ukraine was on that third anniversary, and when the war first started, and we all heard air raid sirens for the first time in Europe in pretty much all of our lifetimes. And the storm of war, as Winston Churchill said, came back to the European continent. And you think about how nobody gave Ukraine a chance. Now, I would like to say that I did. I thought because of all the javelins, that there would be 50,000 Russian casualties, and the war going at least 6 months, so on and so forth. But beyond that, most people didn't, and Ukraine believed in itself. and the remarkable heroism, the remarkable solidarity. In Ukraine, that was always a nation for centuries, even when, Russia refused to recognize it and tried to colonize it throughout the 20th century. That nation was always there. And you saw that nation, and you saw those people, and you saw that history that was always there on that day in February 3 years ago. And to think about how far they've come, they have this amazing network of friendships and diplomatic relationships. The world has been brought together, at least the part of the world that believes in freedom and not authoritarianism, from whether it's Finland and Sweden joining NATO to whether it's, Japan providing assistance. I mean, Ukraine diplomatically as a world power has come so far so fast. They went from a military that maybe had 20,000 combat-ready troops, like, in 2014, if even that, to a 1 million-man army that is leading in innovation every single day, which has outpaced the Russians when it comes to the development of different kinds of drones, have drones that can go, 1,000 miles deep into Russia, dozens and dozens of different kinds of drones, making millions a year. The literal cradle of military innovation, a 1 million-man army now. And I just wanted to say that they deserve a lot of credit for that. I think for like foreign fighters, and make sure we'll understand this, is, people will say, wow, that's so brave, that you went. And first of all, I think as a soldier, humility and compassion are the two most important values you can have. Humility, so you can continue to learn, and compassion, understand that you're privileged to serve. My response to this, and other foreign fighters, and make sure you understand this, is I had no choice but to go. I had to go. The most powerful force I've ever felt in my life is gravity. It's not hurricane force winds. It's not a category 3 tornado. It is the power of the voice pulling me to Ukraine, and that we had to be there. And I think that the way that the foreign fighters have integrated into Ukrainian society, a lot of them end up staying there, living there, getting, working on citizenship. There's been a great community of support for fundraising for them as well. And my unit was all foreign fighters. We had several wounded. Luckily, none of them were killed in my year and a half there. But I think it's been a great community of people to both learn from the Ukrainians and also to help train the Ukrainians, to train each other, to learn the culture, and to participate in something that is awful. You never want war, but there is a strange beauty that comes from, and I swear it's hard not to even get emotional right now. The most beautiful thing you'll see is people sticking together in a war, and to see people learn and fight and give everything, and and to see those good people who, when that war happened, it was like a fucking bat symbol in the sky. Good people who've had this dormant emotional state inside them their entire life, saying, fuck, that's my purpose. I get to do something that matters. And they go there. So I was just privileged and benefited to feel that. So I guess that's all. That's all I can take right now.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your honest answer. The war is not just being fought on the battlefield. It's a war of narratives. Philip Ittner, you've lived and reported from Ukraine for years. How have you seen international media coverage evolve? And do you think Ukraine's story is being told accurately?
First off, John, to quote Fred Rogers, always look for the helpers. As far as the media is concerned, as a veteran member of the media, it's been terrible. It's been the press, the international press corps, especially English-speaking press corps, has been terrible in the coverage of this war. There's been little to no attempt to understand anything below a surface level the day-to-day horse race, or the scrimmage line, as I like to call it. Guys fixated on maps, or camera crews that'll come in and they'll go to the refugee center or the IDP center, or hospitals, what have you, but all very surface level. I doubt that many Americans are aware of the centuries of colonization that's been attempted here. The mantra that Donald Trump puts out, that it would never have happened if I was president. A Ukrainian war of independence is always going to be on the table every time Moscow gets on its back foot. At least that's the case for the last 125 years. So this is bigger than any one president or anything. This is a fight that has been going on for quite some time. And the media doesn't understand it because they don't have Russia experts. They don't have Ukraine experts. All the experts they do have in this part of the world generally come from a place where they were posted to Moscow. So they see this through a Russian prism. We don't have Ukrainian experts in the press corps. So there's that. And I always knew that they would be moving on to the next shiny object because sadly, especially for these large media outlets, this costs a lot of money to build a bureau from scratch in Ukraine. After the attack in Israel happened on October 7th, and the subsequent war, with Gaza and Israel, this place almost emptied out completely of the press corps because, of course, they already have offices and bureaus and fixers and cars and all the rest of it down in Israel. But here they would have had to make a massive decision to infuse the place with capital and cash and infrastructure, and they just weren't willing to do it. They fly back in, they parachute in for a week or two. They tick all the boxes. They go to the front lines. They speak to this member of the government or that general or whatever, and then they disappear again. I am very strong in my condemnation of the way the International Press Corps, and again, especially the English language press corps, has covered this story, and they've done a real disservice not only to the Ukrainians but to their own audience in helping them to understand what's going on here. And then to touch upon, importantly, I think the information warfare is a very real thing, and it is not some innocuous thing that can be dismissed with the Russia probe or the diminishing the importance of Russian information warfare by saying you bought a bunch of Facebook ads. Your democracy couldn't have been that strong to begin with, as J.D. Vance said in Munich. No, we are and have been under attack by the Russians for quite some time, even preceding 2014. Frankly, I think it may have started in 2008 with the Georgian War, but some folks say it goes back even further back to Kosovo. Regardless, nevertheless, Moscow thinks it's at war with us and is acting accordingly. They know they can't beat us on the battlefield, so they're trying to beat us in the information war, which then has an effect on our populace and our voting, the electorate, and they will turn against Ukraine if they are sold the lie that Maidan was a CIA coup, or they're sold the lie that Ukraine's defeat is an inevitability. That costs human lives. It's not an abstract. That's not just information warfare. That's information warfare that results in people dying. So the press corps has to do a better job. I'm not hopeful that they will do, because I think, like a brontosaurus, the industry is dying. The message just hasn't made it from the tip of the tail to the brain yet. So sadly, that falls to people like us. It shouldn't be that way. Maybe in a modern media landscape, it has to be that way. We'll have to figure that out as we proceed. But it's perhaps going to take folks like us and supporting and promoting voices that are pro-Ukrainian, that are giving, that platform Ukrainian voices and those who have a particularly insightful view into this conflict. Get those voices out there, and if it has to be done in a podcast or a YouTube channel, or I'm too old for this, but like Twitch, as I know, Dylan, you spend bloody hours on that damn thing, gaming and whatnot. You too, Andrew. Oh. I'm too old for that. I'm too old for that crap. And I'm an old dog, and I don't learn new tricks very well. But what I can do is I can put out a show every week and try and platform those voices and come on forums like this one. We all need to do it more. We all need to help one another more, because the press corps isn't going to do it. The networks aren't going to do it. it then therefore falls to us to do it. So I am going to bounce as well, Andrew.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure talking to you all and meeting the faces that I hadn't met before, but always lovely to see you, Dylan, and you, Andrew. We have a history together. Just as I step out the door here, we do put a show out every Sunday from our studio in downtown Kyiv, whether it's done remotely on a Zoom call or something likewise, or whether we have a guest in the studio itself. We publish every Sunday. We're adamant on being consistent with that, so you can always count on us putting something out. We have this week a conversation with somebody who was here during the 3-year anniversary, and he's a member of a European-centric think tank based in Berlin. So we'll have him on Sunday. And again, the hours that we publish it, 8 p.m. Kiev time, 6 p.m. London. I guess that's 1 p.m. Eastern, and would that be 10 Pacific? But of course, obviously, it's on our channel, Philip, my channel, my personal channel, Philip Ittner, 1 L and Philip, 2 T's and Ittner. And please do check it out if you like it. For the algorithm purposes, do the click, the alert and the subscribe and all that good stuff, because we have to promote this stuff because the press corps isn't going to do it. So, Andrew, thanks for setting this up. If you ever want me on again, I'd be happy to do it. And to all of you, if you would like to come on my show or have me on yours, or simply when I publish, promote it, and I'll do likewise with yours.
Sounds good,
It's
Phil.
up to us to do this. All right, guys.
Thank you so
very
much
for the time. I'm going to go back to editing.
All right, sounds good, Philip.
And just in time, there's Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan just came in, so you're getting replaced.
I'm getting replaced. It's a good time, but I just while he comes on, I don't know. Can he hear me?
Oh no, I don't think he's still connecting.
Is he still connecting? I'll stay on for a couple seconds just to say hi to Jonathan. Likewise goes for Silicon Curtain. There's another great outlet that we all should be promoting.
I think he's still getting his stuff worked out.
Is he still getting his stuff together? Yeah. All right. Well, I do have to get back to working on this week's episode, so I'm going to bounce. But if you would relay to Jonathan all my best, and you guys all take care.
All right, sounds good, Phil. Take care. All right. So as you guys saw, Jonathan Fink's joining us from Silicon Curtain. We'll integrate him in. Before we do that, Dylan Burns. Now, besides your work on the Twitch machine, very good work there. You've embedded with frontline units. How does firsthand reporting from the battlefield challenges or reinforce mainstream media narratives?
Oh gosh. Well, it certainly challenged a lot of narratives that I had been told either by people that I didn't know were Russophiles beforehand, or people who had taken up narratives without knowing it. One example that I remember very clearly, and it was probably one of the clearest. I think I realized this on my very first embed. I was embedded on the Zaporizhia front. We were getting chased by drones and stuff, and it was a very strange first experience for me. Probably shouldn't have been my first embed, if I'm being completely honest. But I remember the whole time as I'm watching all these Ukrainians on the forward operating position, like half a mile from the Russians, and then I go to training after the training with SPG-9s, and I'm talking to all these people. I pick up on the fact that every single person I'm meeting that day is talking to me in Russian. Every single person is talking to me in Russian. Every single Ukrainian soldier I'm fighting on the front line on my very first embed is a Russian speaker that the Russians were coming to supposedly liberate because of this oppression of the Russian-speaking peoples. And what I realized as the longer time I was in the country is that the language stuff is so misinterpreted, so misconstrued. The way that people talk about it is, if you speak Russians, the Russians own you. When you listen to Americans talk about American politicians or the press, they talk about it the way the Chinese talk about their people when they leave China, as if the idea those people speak Russian, so they're part of the Ruski Mir, and since they're part of the Ruski Mir, we have control of them, we have control of their land, we have control of their peoples, we have to go there and guide them in that way. It's this possession of them after they've colonized them linguistically. You colonize them linguistically, destroy their native language, and then use their use of your language as a justification to continue colonizing them. And that was something that I think the language conflict, which was displayed in a very like, oh, it's a little over here, it's a little over. That was definitely something that really shattered my misconceptions. I would also say that one of the big reasons I came here in the first place was because everybody said the country was gonna not be invaded, and if it is invaded, the country is gonna collapse in like a week. And by coming out here and meeting with people and talking to people, you can listen to the direct motivations of those instead of listening to people in suits speak for those in villages that they've never met, which is what was happening. It was a lot of professors going to universities and saying, well, if they got invaded, these people would understand the power of the Ruski Mir, they would understand the Russians, they would put down their arms, and it led to really, really bad calculations because you didn't understand people's motivations, that they wanted a civil society. They actually care about anti-corruption efforts, and so being dominated by a terribly corrupt state is probably something they would not prefer. They don't like their hospitals getting blown up. I mean, these seem like very obvious to realize in retrospect, but somehow, in some way, it feels like a lot of the coverage in the media seem to blur those facts or seem to not show that. And I don't know if it's due to a lack of investment on the ground journalists and the fact they just want to rely on like freelancers or what's the most convenient or like cost-effective option. And that's why we're not getting a lot of that, or we weren't getting a lot of that before the war. But yeah, I think those were the two big things that I got really shook up on. I also do want to throw up there quickly that Trump, I've seen so much. I don't know how you guys reacted to this initially, right? But my initial reaction was when I saw this Trump-Zelensky meeting was, my God, this is such a disaster that I don't think anybody can try to salvage this. But then I looked online, and there seems to be a lot of people who genuinely think that the president, like his entire cabinet, the vice president, and his entire staff surrounding one person and berating him somehow like projects strength, as if this is all about owning the libs. And I know this is sad to think about, but I think for a lot of people that are strongly supporting Trump through this, right, who said, oh, he's going to end the war in 24 hours, and now months later, they're completely forgotten about it, and they're just clapping along as Trump insults Zelensky. For them, it's about their political motivations was wrecking the libs, right? And if your political motivation and the reason you get involved in political activism is wrecking the libs or wrecking your political opponent, and this isn't just true for, by the way, the MAGA movement. There are people who work based upon political spite everywhere. But if that's the reason you're in politics, what do you do in geopolitics? If it's Trump v. Zelensky and you're based upon spite, then you choose to hate Zelensky. You choose that he's the enemy, Trump's against them. This is spite-based politics. You need that person to have spite towards. And that's what Zelensky provides for a lot of the base, a new enemy now that Biden and Harris have been slain. So I think that definitely with how much is going on right now, I think part of this is Trump kind of leaning into the media spectacle to bring attention from all the chaos. But I also just want to throw out there that these dominating moments, which seem like terrible diplomacy, because they are terrible diplomacy, he gets rewarded for by his base. So for us, we see it's negative for the country, it's negative for diplomacy, it's good for his fundraising.
Absolutely, Dylan. Very, very good points. And we also have joined us now Jonathan Fink from Silicon Curtain YouTube channel. Jonathan, if you could just introduce yourself to the panel and the viewers.
Certainly will. So Silicon Curtain is a YouTube channel. Obviously, as you said, it's been going 3 years. Really planned it as the first missiles were falling. We've just had that 3rd anniversary. Yeah, it's an interview-based format. So I have a lot of people on there, from people like Andrew, who've been there on the ground, Mesa as well, obviously with extraordinary experience directly in Ukraine, plus lots of experts like Ben Hodges and others. And it's now the largest, I think the second largest collection of Ukrainians, experts and individuals who are in civic society, second largest sort of archive of those interviews online now. So very powerful, hopefully a very powerful way to amplify Ukrainian voices.
And thank you so much for the work that you do on the channel, and I appreciate being a guest on there. Before we get into a specific question I have for you on the topic we're on now, but just get your take on the Zelensky-Trump Oval Office meeting.
Oh, I mean, I don't know if swearing's allowed in your channel, but
You can say what you need to say.
What an absolute freaking shit show. Unbelievable. And, this might not go down well with everybody, but, if we're throwing around accusations of who is disrespecting the office, my take here is that, yes, Zelensky, I think, lost control under the circumstances, quite possibly. I come from a marketing background, and a lot of my friends are sort of crisis communication experts. I don't think he prepped for this in the way, for instance, he prepared for the Lex Friedman interview. But Lex Friedman, he was expecting despicable, simplistic, disgraceful questions. He was expecting them, and he was perfectly calm and prepared and structured in answering them. Here, he's sort of in the bear pit, but it seems to have taken him by surprise. So for me, that suggests that they didn't prepare nearly enough. And I certainly got the impression that the press gallery was kind of stacked with a number of people who were going to right out there to kind of trigger him, to sort of already get him on edge. That question about suits. I know that it is a thing, right? It is a thing that winds some people up, but it's a pretty trivial question. And I think that sort of stuff is sort of planted in there to just start, like a boxer, just getting him off his game, getting him open to the punches that are going to come. I think that's the key point for me, was there that this isn't just an accidental thing. It wasn't like it seemed to start off so smooth, and after last week, it pulled back from the edge. Isn't this remarkable? Almost miraculous. But today it feels like there's something premeditated about this, that the chaos was actually part of the plan. Might not have been part of Trump's plan. It's difficult to know, but I certainly think this was part of Vance's plan and those forces behind him. I think they wanted to torpedo this. They wanted an excuse to cover up for their electoral failure, which essentially they promised to end the war in however many hours or days it was. That hasn't happened. Now they can turn around, they can blame it on Zelensky. When they go ahead and they do their full jumping into bed with Putin, which they're clearly very keen to do, they can now blame it all on Zelensky. They've got to get out of jail free card with their base. So I think there's something rather quite pernicious behind what seemed to be sort of, a chaotic impromptu thing. I think there's a lot more to it than that. I'm also seeing reports that somehow a TASS correspondent managed to sneak into the room. You don't really sneak into that room, do you? Right. But no, so there was Russian press on the inside, to witness it, and that they'll get everything from the press feeds and the video. So why would you allow someone like that in there? Well, it's the symbolism of it. It's if you're going to stage something like that, then it's you give someone ringside seats for it. That's what it tells me. Yeah.
Exactly, Jonathan. And just more on that, just to bring you into the conversation that we're having now, and it's a good segue. Your work on Silicon Curtain focuses on Russian disinformation. What trends have you observed in how Russia weaponizes media?
So, you've got the big geopolitical game, and then you've got the stuff that comes down to narratives. You've got narratives that are crafted to different audiences, narratives that are crafted to different countries, and you've got narratives that are crafted to a domestic audience versus an international audience. So it's kind of multi-layered. It's a little bit like I think of it as an infinite onion. Just when you think you've peeled away another layer, that there's more layers underneath it. And, just because certain Russian disinformation is kind of obvious and you can pick it out and go, there it is, I'm clever, I've spotted it. There's still layers to the disinformation that you won't spot, that they're coming after you in a multi-layered fashion. And I think we see a number of those layers on display today. We see a lot of narratives that have been really injected into the I would say sort of libertarian podcast ecosystem over many, many years. We see a number of those narratives coming out today, which is Zelensky is a dictator, the war is largely his fault, he doesn't really want peace, blah, blah, blah. The foundations of these have been very, very well laid. And also something that was admitted today is Putin and Trump have had not just numerous phone calls, but another phone call since the one, 2 weeks ago, where it sort of seemed to refresh Trump in a lot of the really, really sort of negative narratives. And then this week he seemed to change and he seemed to reverse those, and it's extraordinary. I think when we look at Vance and others, they've never actually deviated from these narratives. You know, they've been repeating them or variations of them for a very long time now. So, but it's expert the way these are fed in. They're fed into the ecosystem. They're fed via Tucker Carlson. They're fed into the sort of podcast media sphere. They're fed through numerous, potentially assets, potentially useful idiots, who knows, Mearsheimer and others. They're also fed into the whole geopolitical sphere. So it's designed to hit people at every strata of society.
Exactly. And thank you so much for your detailed answer to that, Jonathan. Now let's open a question up to all of you. What military strategies have worked for Ukraine, and where do you see potential changes? We'll start with Macer.
I suppose Ukraine has done well when it's been allowed to innovate. The Ukrainian people are an incredibly innovative people. Technology is a big part of their culture over the last 10, 20 years, and they've utilized it really effectively in this recent war. When it comes to changing the narrative, as it were, sort of after Donald Trump, it's not Trump, excuse me, after Biden stopped the aid last year, they needed a way to show the world that Ukraine actually is not slowly losing. It is very much still in the fight. Russia is losing, although it's taken a little bit of ground, is losing a huge amount of people and, more importantly, weapons. Their economy is overheating, and we need to change the narrative. We need to actually take this war in a different direction. And by going into Kursk, that was such a bold move, a fantastic move, because suddenly Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, when they're negotiating together, they're not just negotiating over Ukrainian lands, they're negotiating over Russian land as well, however small. It's a symbolic thing. So hopefully the Ukrainians will adapt to this new reality that they find themselves in. We spoke earlier about the fact that Europe needs to step up now, that America can no longer be relied on. And I truly hope, and I mentioned it earlier, that Europe and Britain and the other allies, the coalition of the willing, the great people around the world who still support Ukraine, still believe in democracy, and actually still think democracy, freedom, equality are values that we should be fighting for, we should double down in Ukraine. And I really think we should confront Vladimir Putin, so much so that if it involves moving substantial Polish troops to the Belarusian border, let's knock him off his feet a little bit, in the sense that not necessarily doing anything, but actually just threatening, putting our weight around a little bit more, giving the billions that we've got in Brussels, that of his money, take it out and give it to Ukraine. Get our navy to start searching ships that are that contain Russian oil. Most of these ships, and by the way, there's a legal framework for that. Many of these are uninsured ships. They pass close to the shorelines of allied nations that support Ukraine. They should be on those ships, searching the cargoes and impounding its contents. And the simple reason for the fact that if those ships mysteriously sunk in their waters, it would be them paying for the cleanup. These ships have to be insured. So that's just a small little technicality, but it's something that if we had ships actually going out and being a little bit more bold, it's not direct confrontation with Russia, but it is going after ships that are flagged under international law that should have insurance. So it's just about being a little bit more bold. It's also allowing giving as much money and weapons to the Ukrainians as we can possibly get, even going out to utilizing the Danish model, i.e. giving money to Ukrainian businesses to actually build weapons, but also implementing, I believe it was the Czech initiative of buying shells from abroad. We should be expanding that. There's marketplaces out there from Turkey to South Korea that produce tanks and artillery. The French have pushed back on the idea of sending too much of their money out of Europe. They want to be just like the Americans. They want to be investing it in their own industries. But if we want to replace America, we've actually got to start taking a slight hit here. And if we take the 400 billion that the Russians have got in Brussels, we really do have the money to start paying for stuff abroad to support Ukraine, and then give them the permissions to utilize those weapons within Russia. We need to be bold. We need to call his bluff. We are nuclear armed states as well. I don't want to, and I don't want to seem unreasonable when I talk about nuclear weapons and all the rest of it. It's typically only the Russians that like to talk about nuclear weapons, but it's quite irritating the fact that Vladimir Putin thinks he can constantly threaten us with a nuclear annihilation and all the rest of it, when we can turn around and say, actually, we're going to start calling your bluff now. So get to the negotiating table and be a lot more serious than you've been in the past, because we're starting to get fed up with you and the Americans and everything else.
Exactly. Dylan?
Did you remind me of what the question was?
Yep. What military strategy? What military strategies have worked for Ukraine, and where do you see potential changes?
Oh, what strategies have worked? Well, I mean, let me just acknowledge the obvious. The naval war has been insane. The Black Sea Fleet is half of what it used to be, even though the Ukrainians don't really have much of a navy at all. Most of it has either been seized or is long gone. It has been mostly through naval drone warfare, which I think not only is, big news for the Ukrainians in their defense, but also changes, I think, the face of like coastal warfare, coastal defense for the next decades, as the technology is going to continue to develop and people are going to continue to make more and more aggressive sea baby variants or different versions of those types of UAVs, or USVs, unmanned surface vessels. Another thing that's been successful for the Ukrainians, and I don't know if people have seen this, but recently glide bombs have been getting jammed more effective by the Ukrainian armed forces, and I can say those glide bombs are terrifying. They're loud, they shake bunkers. If they're they could be like half a mile away and shake your bunker. They're extremely destructive. And so being able to make them less accurate, so they're more likely to miss, and so they have to use more and more and more of these munitions, it doesn't just strain their supply, it strains their aircraft. If an aircraft has to make 6 or 7 or 8 sorties in order to get the same effect, you're putting more strain on the aircraft, you're putting more strain on the people who have to pilot the aircraft, you're putting more strain on the maintenance crew, you're putting more strain on the airbase and the people, the supplies you need to use to maintain the aircraft. Point is, it makes the entire process more difficult, more time-consuming, and more expensive for the Russians. So this is a recent update, which I think is positive. How long that's going to last, I do not know, because the Russians, of course, are going to try to adapt and try to make the glide bombs more accurate. It's a constant game of cat and mouse. Another thing that I do need to give some credit for the fact that Russia has been invaded by Ukraine. Now, I don't know how much I would say success as in the idea of this has fundamentally changed the foundation of the war. But I do want to say that if anybody said Ukrainian invasion of Kursk on February 24th, 2022, I don't think anybody would have, believed me or anybody else here if they said that. So I think the fact that they've been able to do that is deserving of respect in and of itself, even if it doesn't fundamentally change the dynamic of the battlefield, even if it could possibly change negotiations, but we'll have to wait and see.
And thank you for that, Dylan. John.
Yes,
yeah, I mean oh, sorry, two Johns. John Jackson. Dang it. I got you next, Jonathan Fink. I got you.
Yeah, don't insult Jonathan. We usually keep it so, I mean, I think when Ukraine has been supported, they know what they can rely upon. They've shown an ability to innovate. They've shown an ability to go to a 1 million-man army. They lead in drones, both in its production and in innovation, in tactics as well. We just have to continue to support them. And, I think that, again, where they were in 2014, where they were, before that, and where they are now is incredible. And like it was just recently mentioned, with the glide bombs, and I mean, that was a major issue, that and the fiber optic FPVs. And the fact that they came up with a way to basically make the glide bombs, functionally useless. They have to use up to 16 to 20 to hit one target, which provides notice to people at that target and they can move. I mean, shows that with the right support and with the right backing, they'll be fine. And really the question is, getting serious and making sure they know what they can rely upon from a logistical standpoint. And Europe really needs to get going with that, because as Trump showed today, he's not a reliable partner whatsoever. I mean, they're the adversary again. And again, if you're South Korea, if you're Japan, even if you're Singapore, any of those nations on the Pacific Rim, you're on your own and you're together, but you're not with America. So, and those guys have a huge capacity. Let's unleash the might of South Korea. Let's unleash the might of the Japanese, brilliance in manufacturing to really win this war and to help Ukraine. So that's what we need to do.
Well, thank you, John. And now, Jonathan.
So I'm not, a military expert, and certainly I wouldn't presume to be that. But I think war is now hybrid. War is informational. War involves cyber. It involves political destabilization. So I think one of Ukraine's superpowers has been to unite and not let partisan differences get in the way of survival. That means they can see reality in, I would say, a pre-Trumpian way. They can see reality through a moral lens rather than through some sort of social media artifice, extreme partisanship. Without that, they would have fallen a long time ago. So, all the bullets and tanks and troops in the world won't save you if you don't have a unifying set of values and a unifying story that keeps you in the fight. And I think that's what Ukraine has shown and what it continues to show, and why Ukraine is in such a leadership position in the world. More so, I would say, even than Britain, Poland, and others, because we still are open to our sort of left-right thinking, our partisan thinking, still makes us vulnerable to Russian disinformation and sort of weaponization of our information sphere.
Jonathan, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you because I heard something from somebody in chat, and I want to know your honest perspective. I just met you. Somebody in chat said that you were of the perspective during the election that Trump and Biden were probably equally as bad.
No.
Was that not your opinion?
No, absolutely not. No, that is, and some people.
That's why I wanted to ask you
that recently. Yeah, that's a misinterpretation of what's been going on here. I mean, I've always thought that Trump would be a sort of wild card, and the probability is that he would actually side with Putin and try to dismantle NATO. I mean, that was always the default setting. In his early cabinet, with people like Kellogg and others, it seemed to suggest that perhaps something more nuanced was going on. And I'm in touch with a lot of GOP Republicans. They have been trying very hard to inject certain good information into that sphere. So what I was doing was producing episodes that were saying, look, Biden's done some really terrible things, but he hasn't dismantled US democracy. He hasn't dismantled the Constitution, and he hasn't dismantled, the norms of diplomacy and all these things, and he would never betray, Ukraine in this manner. But his policies, and he had some exceedingly poor advisors in Jake Sullivan and others, completely, inept for the job they were doing. His strategy would have led to a long, slow bleeding out of Ukraine. Having said that, Russia is on a path to collapse. So, under Biden or Harris, even a continuation of that policy might still have led to Ukrainian victory, but it might equally, have led to a long, slow bleed out. So that's been my critique of that all along. Trump is always a kind of a wild card. But what I realized, or what I thought, was that if you just go, Trump, evil, well, you're not going to get any good information injected. No one's going to listen in that sphere. And you might as well kind of give up on that. I mean, I'm in that space now. I think we're now at the point where you got to pick a side, and you're either on the resistance or you're in the empire.
Was there like a point where you're like, okay, it's too late? Because for me, I think when Tulsi Gabbard got confirmed,
yes,
I won't say that completely made me have no hope whatsoever, but that made it hope into a miracle. You know what because I don't see how that person controlling your information streams gonna lead to you making good decisions.
I think Doge, I mean, the US aid for me was the first big blow, and the eviscerating of US governance, and obviously the sort of the data access that being given to Doge. I mean, that already to me has echoes of the kind of state capture and state dismantling that you couldn't even imagine in your worst dystopian sort of movies, like Stephen King, kind of the worst kind of scenario. And it has echoes of, well, what would Trump want? Well, he'd want American soft power to be dismantled. He would want US aid, which may be flabby, may be inefficient. There may be a lot of programs in there which could be cut, but it does a lot of good as well. What's the first thing he'd want? Yeah, he'd want the US to be a basket case, just like he wanted Ukraine to be a basket case. He'd want everyone screaming at each other, and he'd want governance and rule of law dismantled. Well, hello. I mean, that's been going on almost from day one of the US presidency. So my take has been, okay, I'm not involved in US domestic politics, and that is going to be a car crash come what may. But maybe we can salvage something out of this from Ukraine, because there's some interesting mixed signals going on. So I produced episodes that didn't say, oh, this is what Trump's going to do, or Trump's a good guy, or he's likely to listen. But it was saying, if Trump was minded to beat Putin, here's how you do it. So I tried to inject ideas and opportunities into the debate so that they could be shared with Republicans who could try and inject that into, the MAGA sphere. That's failed. I think that's decisively failed now.
Why do you think that is?
I think because there are people in Trump's circle who are always minded not to go down that route. I wonder whether, last week when they were trying to throw Ukraine under the bus, and we had this extraordinary kind of, puppet show last week, which was extremely triggering. And then this week, it's all changed. I think that's part of some sort of elaborate smoke and mirrors process, whereas behind the scenes, there are people who always wanted to shift policy towards Russia, towards authoritarianism, towards a different mode of operation in the world, which is informal power that benefits oligarchy and a move away from rule of law. That was always the game plan. But the question was going to be whether they see Putin as a sort of competitor or rival in that, and then may decide to use Ukraine as a pawn to degrade and take down Putin. So then you're back to sort of bipolar world with China and America. Or whether they do what they're doing now and throw it completely under the bus and side with Russia to try to take on China. Those are the two games, I think. And I put a little bit of a bet that at least for a while, let's try and influence it towards the slightly better outcome, which is to take Russia down. Now I think it's kind of quite dangerous, because the only other bloc on the planet that doesn't really fit in this pattern of great power blocs and their subsidiaries is the EU. And it's one of the last repositories of, I would say, any sense of values and rule of law in terms of a multi-country bloc that's not sort of purely transactional or whatever. So I would expect, after what we see today, that you would see a combination of Russia and the US trying to destroy over the coming months the EU.
What are your thoughts on this, John? Between Dylan and Jonathan Fink, John Jackson.
I mean, we're in like a really bad, dangerous place in the United States politically and in the information space. It's only going to get worse as AI gets more and more complicated and realistic. As a former Republican, I really, the MAGA movement is just riddled with bad faith actors. And, the only way you can try to appeal to them is to somehow try to appeal to Trump's ego, that's even a failed like a suicide mission. I mean, when you look at the people that he's put in power, and people they look at, Tulsi Gabbard's obviously one, but when you look at, they're either people who are completely malleable and have no spine or spirit or soul whatsoever, like Marco Rubio. The photos of him, like sitting on the couch today, is like all the other photos of him where his soul's basically left his body.
Mm-hmm. Or Lindsey Graham, which is even more disingenuous. He's
right. Yeah, today.
Yet he'll bend the knee whenever required.
Well, he actually said something ridiculous today. He's like, after this thing, he's like, well, maybe Zelensky has to resign to secure the peace. And that's like. And he was just at the Munich Security Conference, he's the most two-faced person, because he was at the Munich Security Conference with the Ukrainians, with Zelensky, telling him how great he was and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, we're in a place where, I don't know that it's going to be possible to break through. And it's, and especially in the current environment where you have senators who won't stand up to Donald Trump in any way whatsoever, even if they may support Ukraine. Now, Tom Tillis did have this big demonstration in the Senate after Trump calls Zelensky a dictator, but he didn't mention Trump by name. And really, it's the only way this is going to change, and I think there's a very good chance it will change, is that the accumulation of all of these things happening with the dismantling of the civil service in the United States, the dismantling of USAID, the absolute destruction of norms, the violation of laws, the impounding funds that are given that were designated by Congress and now Trump refuses to spend them, the violation of court orders, the 15, 20, 25 different injunctions that have been issued. And, this center of gravity actually shifting, and especially with this upcoming budget fight, because it's going to be a disaster for the Republicans. I don't think they're going to be able to pass a budget. I don't think they're going to be able to pass a continuing resolution on March 14th. They needed Democratic help last time. And remember, they're in the majority, and either 31 or 34 Republicans in the House had to voted against the continuing resolution. That's coming up here in just a couple weeks. And also we have the debt ceiling. And so we have, and the budget that they've passed is politically impossible. I mean, we have the outlines of what they passed the other day, but when they actually get down to the nitty gritty, they have to actually start putting, saying what they're cutting and not just lying to the people and claiming there's no taxes on tips. And that's not in the bill that was passed. But that they're going to have to, and that truth is going to come out to the American people, and the government shuts down, which I think is very likely to happen. And the chances of that are like 80 to 90%. Then Trump is, and remember, he's a lame duck president in the sense that he can't serve another term. He may try to. That's not going to work out well if he does. But and so you have this. We're at this place where we have this first 100 days where it's pretty easy for most presidents, and they start and people give them some momentum, and the public opinion is with them. But he started to nosedive. He's going from the 50s approval down to in the 30s. And things are starting to shift, around all these points to where he's going from the first 100 days to going to being in that first 2 years of a lame duck presidency. And so when the political realities shift, as they are every day, all of us, I'm sure, wake up, look at our phone, and like, what in the hell's going on? What now? Yesterday was Andrew Tate in this fiasco with the Epstein file. I mean, it's always something. That's accumulating. And you can't gut the government. We're getting rid of USAID and our disease monitoring at the Centers for Disease Control. And we have this like fucking super virus, pardon my language, over in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has killed 50 people in 48 hours. Things are happening. Airplane runway incursions. So
planes falling out of the sky. I mean, it's been like half a dozen.
Yeah, right, exactly. So the momentum is shifting, and he's going to start losing support. And that shit today in the Oval Office may play good to the 20% of the MAGA base, but I think most Americans see that. Certainly, most people in the world, but most Americans see that, and it's like, okay, whether you're Republican or Democrat, that looks like a situation that's out of control, and that should not be happening in our Oval Office, and that is like ridiculous, disgraceful, and I'm not with that happening out in the open in front of everybody in public. I mean, that because people aren't used to that, and it just looks like a kind of a chaotic, out of control situation. And also, we've seen since that meeting, we've seen leader after leader after leader. We're still waiting on the UK, but I mean, Germany, Spain, France, Germany too. Yeah, they've all come out and supported Zelensky, which is a refutation of Trump. So I think today hurt Trump more than it hurt Zelensky. At least with respect to public perception. So those are all the things I think are going to really kind of change and shift things as we move forward.
Let's also question their strategy because even before the last couple of weeks, it seems that there have been noises coming out of the White House which are trying to echo what clearly is a Russian strategy to get Zelensky removed. Well, let's kind of follow that experiment a little bit. If you did force a change of leadership or even, goodness, an election, even though it's completely inappropriate at this time, well, they'd most likely get Zaluzhny. You can't, can you even imagine Zaluzhny in that scenario today? I mean, he probably would have just, thumped Vance squarely in his, entitled face. That would be good television. Now, I
Exactly.
wonder if they
Well,
got the
and
Swords
also-
belt back. I hope they got
I mean,
the
look-
heavyweight belt back. You know that.
Look at even if you're a MAGA person, look at Trump. He just called Zelensky a dictator, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, and said all these terrible things about him. Then yesterday he has like this senile moment. It's either a senile moment or it's like his form of apology and diplomatic walking back in a very kind of crude and ham-handed way. Wow, did I say that about Zelensky? I don't know if I'd said that. Blah blah blah. And then now today he's back to this. I mean, no matter who you are, if you got to be honest with yourself. Like this ping pong back and forth between these extreme positions, again, like something's wrong with this guy.
Exactly, John. And
Well,
Macer,
the
go ahead,
trouble
John.
trouble is the way Russian narratives here work on extremely partisan, minds, is that they won't look at the scenario in the way you and I are looking at it. They will hear the narrative, he's ungrateful, he's disrespected, he's got our money, and look, unfortunately, the narratives will override that perception of reality.
And it's terrible. And Macer, more specifically, these this all can create fatigue, right? And people supporting Ukraine can create fatigue in some, or inspire others, or get some fire going. But when this continuously happens, we need to find places where we can find resiliency and remain steadfast. So how do we combat this? How do we combat fatigue? How do we continue to have resiliency in this situation and ensure that Ukraine remains a priority in our discussions?
Yeah, well, it was mentioned right at the beginning of the conversation, I think, about the rise of the far right in Europe and in America now as well. It's effectively the rise of populism. The point that was actually made, which actually I actually disagreed with, they said it was something that was always innate within America, and it's just bubbling to the surface. I disagree. You could almost accuse me of being overly romantic about America, but I actually genuinely do love America. I genuinely like the American political system. I think the Constitution is a fantastic document, and I'm a big fan of the US. It's my second favorite country after my own. This didn't come. The rise of the populist Donald Trump it came not from the institutions. It came from the people. It came from a change in the culture and the challenges that we face. It's been exploited by Russia and China. So by the way, I'll give you the long answer on this one, because we basically, and the short answer is to say that we've got to combat the rise of the far right. We've got to counter propaganda. We've got to insert the truth and encourage local people to support Ukraine. But on the bigger issue here is actually fundamental. The rise of the far right is actually fundamental, not just for Ukraine, but just for our cultures generally, and the fact that the Chinese and the Russians are exploiting this situation for their own ends. They're exploiting the weaknesses in our political system, of which there are many, and there are increasing challenges with the rise of sort of the increasing global poverty. We've seen the rise of social media and the rise of technologies, mobile phones, all the rest of it. These things are fantastic things. They've brought us together. But as a few years ago, Barack Obama once said that one of the biggest challenges of social media is people are getting locked into bubbles, and these are information chambers, which they are not exploiting the beauty of the World Wide Web and really exploring new ideas. And Donald Trump and Vance, Russia, China, all the rest of it are just exploiting all of these things. So and they've just the rise of this cultural war and everything else. I actually blame the extreme left. I blame the extreme right. I actually blame the centrists too. We're all the fact that the United States had Biden on one side, Donald Trump on the other, is just insane. Like, America is this fantastic country with hundreds of millions of incredibly talented people. How they got they whittled down that number to Donald effing Trump is unbelievable. But anyway, so as I said, you perhaps go back to my short answer on that one about countering the rise of this new phenomenon, which is the rise of popularism in Europe and America and the West generally. Be self-critical. Realize that the last 10 years of the culture war, the inequality within our societies and the rest of it, they've been exploited by the isms that we don't like. That's why it helps explain the rise of Islamists in the Middle East and fascists and communists and all the rest of it all around the rest of the world. So yeah, we need to knuckle down, find our values, and fight back.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Macer. All right, let's bring it to the final question prompt I have for you guys, so you guys can enjoy the rest of your Friday evening, or at least try to, or cover the Dillinger streaming still, and etc. What's the most important message about this war that people, whether in Ukraine or abroad, need to hear right now? Let's start with Jonathan Fink.
I think the most important thing has to be, and this was true, this was true, and I've been saying this for a while, which is that even if Trump had secured some kind of agreement, and actually, let's face it, even with the minerals deal, it was dramatic improvement on the deal last week. There's no security articulated it, and even before this press event went, pear-shaped today, there's no commitment to a security backstop or real security there. Trump, I think, just clearly is not just extreme transactional, because that almost normalizes the sort of mafia mindset that he's got. But I think the mentality there is just get as much out as you can, dig it out of the ground out of Ukraine, make as much money as you can, because he probably understands that war or a resurgence of Russian aggression is inevitable. And it's worse than that, because I'm thinking, they are definitely wanting to cash in, have a temporary peace, make as much money as possible out of Ukraine, make as much money as possible out of Russia as they can, on the understanding that this is temporary and his time in the White House is temporary, and he's going to make his donors as much cash and loot as they can. He doesn't care if the war begins again. And my point here is that Putin's goal is to reform his empire, erase Ukraine, destroy the international order. Whatever Trump was or wasn't going to agree, that is just a temporary cessation of what is an almost inevitable and eternal hostility that we will see from Russia until it ceases to be an empire, until it ceases to collapse. And that's as true, last year as it was today, as it will be next year.
Thank you so much, Jonathan Fink. John Jackson.
Yeah, I would echo those comments by saying that, we can win the war now and support Ukraine, and I believe it's inevitable Ukraine wins, just as the sun rising tomorrow. But or your children can fight an even bigger war where everyone in this world has nuclear weapons in 5 to 10 years, and that will happen. So that's your choice. There is no third option where you just go off and make money off of the rest of the world, be transactional, and everything is okay and there's peaceful. So it's war now or war later. Support our allies that and try to rescue some semblance of our honor and dignity and the belief that our agreements will be honored, or just go into a world where the only thing that matters is might is right. You've seen the movie The King's Speech. There was a speech given in the eve, and it's a very famous speech and it applies now. And what he said in that speech is, it is unthinkable that we should fail to meet the obligation, that everything we hold dear is at stake, that, it's either might is right or we're going to stand up to these people. And if you want to live in a world where the person with the biggest nuclear arsenal or the person with the nuclear weapons is the one that wins everything just by force and threats, which is no different than, you see two people on the street and one of them has a hammer and the other one doesn't. If you want to go back to that caveman shit in everything in the world, then do nothing now, because that's what we will go back to, but it will happen. And that's the binary choice, now or later, and it must be now. And also the other binary choice is we can be in a world where, as Macer was saying about humanism, another expression of that is the unity of mankind expressed by Martin Luther King, that what happens geographically in another place life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are God-given rights, and because as such, they don't care about those are not boundaries. God doesn't care about geographical boundaries. If something bad happens in Ukraine and somebody's born in Ukraine, they have the same rights as somebody born in the United States as they're born in India. And that's the only concept that can exist where mankind can progress forward in this world, and the only political and geopolitical choice that we can make that's consistent with that concept of caring about everybody and about having a more moral and just world going forward that we want our children to live in is to support Ukraine now. So at least it's very black and white, and let's go in the light forward with Ukraine. So thanks for having me today.
Of course, John. Macer.
I think the thing that we should all learn and take away from all this, and something that's a bit of information that needs to get out today, is that basically we're not hopeless bystanders here. There are people listening to this stream who feel passionately about this conflict. They've learned about it for a number of years and been involved for years, as many of the people in this panel, if not all, actually every single one of this panel have. I have tried to live my life as an internationalist. I fight in different conflicts. It's been controversial for some, but I don't just go anywhere randomly. I pick my solidarity incredibly carefully, in the sense that there has to be a wronged party here, and that's one of the things that drives me nuts about a modern phenomenon that strikes us in the West, is we've sort of forgotten what a victim is. I think that's which is perfectly displayed by what happened today in the White House, where you've got two pig ignorant people looking at a man who was democratically elected, who's seen his country almost destroyed by Russia, i.e. invaded, 20% of it taken, 100,000 people potentially dead, Ukrainians dead, hundreds of thousands of Russians. And you've got a guy staring at him and belligerently demanding thanks from him for what little money they've given, which is already been bloated by their own figures and looted by American companies to pay for more kit for the American supplies. And at the end of the day, it's not going to be a gift anyway, apparently, because they've got a huge mineral deal with Ukraine that they want to get across the line as well. So this is just an exploitative power that has taken advantage of a country that's in a very vulnerable place. In many ways, if America follows through with this, they are more predatory, more reprehensible, almost than Russia itself. Russia, at least, were the ones that invaded and showed themselves to be the fascists that they are. If the Americans turn around and stab the person in the back after supporting them, give them aid for years, and then demand payment for that aid, I think that tells you a hell of a lot about the new direction that Donald Trump wants to take America in. But anyway, as I said before, we're not hopeless bystanders. What I genuinely hope is that people listen to these conversations. They think to themselves, right, I need to speak to my congressperson. I need to lobby people locally. I need to raise funds for Ukraine. I need to perhaps go and volunteer myself, whether that's making meals somewhere or packing IFACs somewhere, or even going to the front line, whatever your capabilities and whatever you think you can be most effective. But either way, every single thing that you do, if you are genuinely motivated and work hard, is absolutely needed and is just as worthwhile doing than anyone else. We are all equal in this fight. We all genuinely support Ukraine. And if you hear this, the only message I've got for you is to get behind us and, no, not even behind us, sorry. Stand alongside us, sorry, and let's fight back.
Thank you, Macer. Dylan Burns.
Sorry, moved my mic around. So you can't, you have to create conditions for peace. Peace isn't going to fall out of the sky. It's something that requires investment, right? But you can't make that proper investment within 24 hours. You cannot make that proper investment with the strategy that's being followed by the Trump administration. And I want people to know that it's not as simple as coming to a table, shaking hands and saying peace has descended upon the land, the golden age is finally here. You have to create conditions, or what you're doing is you're pausing the violence. What you're doing is you're patting yourself on the back, and you get to feel good about yourself because you got to stop seeing reports about Ukraine being bombed for a few years until it starts up again because you didn't create conditions for long-term peace. That's why when Zelensky asked for security guarantees, he's so insistent, and why it's so terrifying to hear Donald Trump say, we'll do security guarantees after we find an agreement. As if it's an afterthought, as if it's like just an asterisk at the end, a little detail, a little squiggly line at the end of your signature. No, it is the signature. It's everything. Without the security guarantees, all you're doing is allowing a leader of the largest nation on the planet, who has made very clear he wants to conquer Ukraine. He doesn't believe Ukraine has a right to exist. He sees it as an extension of Russia, and if it does not exist as an extension of Russia, it cannot exist at all. So you cannot live with 2 brain cells or more and see him say that, make speeches about that, and aim towards that goal, and just assume that based upon his word and on his good, his moral standing, he's not going to invade again. He did in 2014 the whole time he lied about it. He did in 2022 the whole time he lied about it. And so wanting peace is one thing. Being a naive fool signing for a false bill of goods to take a story that's too good to be true is acting like a petulant child towards another nation, towards the people who are going to have to live with the results of you being a petulant child who is tired of being upset when you turn on the TV and hear sad stories from Ukraine. So I really do believe people need to understand it's not as simple as signing a piece of paper or just getting these two sides to come together. You need to create conditions for peace, or you'll have to fight another war, and it'll be our children or the Ukrainian children fighting that war, depending on where it starts and where it ends.
Thank you so much.
If you want to find me, you can find me at Dylan Burns TV. If anybody, I know people were asking about the house fire at the start of stream. If anybody wants to support the recovery effort, I do have an Amazon wish list, which you can find in my exclamation point in my YouTube chat. Appreciate any support to that.
Thank you, Dylan. I was just about to go around the room and have everybody start with Jonathan Fink. How can people follow your work? How can they support your work? And what projects do you have coming up?
So there's the channel, there's Patreon, there's Buy Me a Coffee, there's all the usual kind of stuff there. But, there are people with limited means out there who enjoy the content. So in that case, just watch the annoying ads, and that kind of helps. It also helps to sort of share the materials around and take action. I don't want people to watch these videos and despair. I want them to think, okay, what can we actually do to change something? Whether that might be join a political party, write to your representative, it might be, befriending Ukrainian charities, or as we've been getting much more vocal on the channel recently, is investing in drones and other sort of kinetic solutions to pushing back the worst kind of illegal immigrant, which of course is Russians, and that sort of stuff. So they can watch it on YouTube. We've also got Spotify and others. We're also doing a lot of more real world events this year because they have an impact. So we had events already in Kyiv and Lviv in January, and there's a lot more stuff coming up, hopefully every month this year, to have an impact for victory.
Thank you, Jonathan. John Jackson.
Yeah, so I'll just follow me on Twitter at HisGoesCobra, and then I'll have links to my YouTube page and have my Substack posted there. So if you follow me there, you'll see what you need, and appreciate everybody watching today and supporting Ukraine.
Thank you, John.
And thank you, Andrew, and everybody else who showed up.
Of course. Macer.
Follow me on Twitter. I don't have any ongoing projects at the moment. I'm actually in status at the moment doing other projects, but I still support my old team in Ukraine. They've been ordered. I can say this, they've been ordered by a different department to go join a different battalion, which is fantastic news. It's going to be quite exciting to see them take on a lot more diverse missions. And I'll be fundraising for the team and the new regiment, which I think I can say, the 8th Special Forces Regiment in Ukraine are doing a fundraiser soon for some night vision. And I said to them that I will help them out with that. So that's something that's going to come up very, very soon. But just follow me on Twitter.
Of course. And Dylan, do you have any projects coming up? You mentioned your channel, but do you have anything coming up?
Oh, yeah. I have a report on the human safari in Kherson. I interviewed a bunch of civilians who were bombed by the Russians and targeted, as well as military personnel who are defending Kherson from a possible Russian re-annexation, because they still want to conquer Kherson. They're very open about that. And so the people who are hunting civilians on the streets of Kherson are still demanding the city of Kherson as a precondition for negotiations. They were demanding that months ago, and I don't think that they've stepped off the gas pedal on that. So I want to bring as much attention to that story as possible.
And thank you for all the work that you do. Well, to our panelists today, Macer Gifford, Operator Starsky, Philip Ittner, Terrell Starr, Jonathan Fink, John Jackson, and Dylan Burns, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for spreading your expertise. And thank you so much for supporting Ukraine. You guys have a fantastic rest of your night.
You too, Merc. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Good panel, by the way, Merc. Good job.
Thank you so much.
Happy Friday.
Goodbye.
Yep.
All right. That was the latest panel. We've done 2 of them now. We did one on Monday. I think I might continue doing these because they're really, really informative. They bring people together, a lot of different voices, different perspectives, soldiers, journalists, civilians. I think it's all good to do, and I'll keep doing it. I would like, and I had somebody comment my Twitter. I have no opposition to having women as panelists. I just need to know who is willing to do that. Okay. If any women would like to be a part of any of my panels, you are absolutely more than welcome to. Just reach out. I put it out on the internet a couple days ago. Obviously, with the Oval Office meeting today, it absolutely, more people were like, oh, I want to be on a panel now, but I already set up the panel like 2 days ago. I had figured that there would be some type of news from the mineral signing. That didn't happen, but there was going to be something out of today that we would have had to talk about. But if you're like, doesn't matter what you are, if you support Ukraine, you're more than welcome to join my panel. All right, I'm choosing, and it doesn't have to be influencers, it doesn't have to be YouTubers, but I'm trying to find people that also have audiences or also have like platforms, because then more information can get out to more people faster. But of course, like I had a Monday night, we had a Discord call with my subscribers. You don't have to be on video, you can just join. We'll do that probably this weekend. Because we have some reactions to get to today and everything that we talked about in the panel. I haven't reacted to it. I've posted about it, obviously, and I have my thoughts, but I haven't pulled it up for you guys to look at it and react to it. But I'm going to do that in about 30 minutes. Let me go eat and get ready for that and react, and probably have a J, because I'm going to be honest. You guys saw John. Shout out to John Jackson. Big fan of John. We also met in Kyiv the first time. The very first time I ever met John Jackson was in Kyiv. I'm walking with Operator Starsky. We're hanging out with, her name was Ashley. She's a teacher. She has a platform on X. And that's how we got to meet John. A very, very good guy. But I mean, you can see it just how like, it's hard to sit still and be like chill during this situation. That's why I get comments on my gaming stream from trolls, but people come in and say, Mercado, you're like antsy now. And like, you can't sit. How can you? How can you just sit here and like react to all of this and like not have a reaction to it? Other than if you're just a media, you're just a media hound, or you're a transactional person, like Dylan pointed out, right? And I'm not that. I suck at it, actually. I struggle being a transactional person. In America, you kind of have to be transactional a lot of times, not all the time, but I suck at it. So like I wear my emotions on my sleeve and shit. I'm like, so I could. When you guys were commenting about John, people are mad. Okay, people are upset, and it's hard to keep that in, especially people like John or like Macer, who have fought in the armed forces. Right? They wore the Ukrainian flag on their shoulder. They've wore the camouflage, and they've helped defend the country. Okay, it's like, how can now you do that, right? And you've taken Russian missiles, you've fought Russians, and then you're sitting in on a YouTube call talking about it, right? After what happened in the Oval Office today. So it's just like a lot. It's a lot to balance mentally. And oftentimes people like us, we're going to be moving around, because I can't sit still during stuff like this. I can't personally, because it's a lot to take in. And it's a lot of bullshit. It really is just flat out bullshit. And it sucks because, we're just regular people. We're not the government. I'm not a federal worker. Like, if I could probably lose my job, I guess, if I was a federal worker in Trump's administration anyways. But, we're just people with platforms and our voices that support Ukraine. So that's the only thing we can really do. And it really sucks. It feels like we're in the cuck chair. And I hate being in the cuck chair. But, yeah, we'll react to Zelensky's Oval Office meeting. I have to go smoke a joint before that and be like, at least my body relaxed. But yeah, about a half hour, you guys, full reactions, the rundown of the news, all the reactions on Twitter, world leaders responding, half hour. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, notification bell turned on. Hope to see you guys on the next stream, and then we're gaming later. So we're doing another Mercado Media stream, but I want to make sure that this stream is just the panel. I recorded it, which I have to stop recording now. So I'll have the first panel we did on Monday posted, and then this panel, and then I think we'll keep doing these. I'll just keep inviting people. Be like, hey, you want to be on a panel? And if they say yes, then they're in, and then we'll just do it like this every time. All right, that's it for me. Hope to see you on the next stream. Half hour. Go get your dinner. Go eat your snacks. Go try to relax before I react to the nonsense from today. We'll watch the whole Oval Office meeting. I'll pull up the clip, obviously, or the 5 minutes of nonsense, but there's like a whole 40-minute meeting that they did. So we'll react to that, and then gaming after that. All right, you guys, thank you for participating in the panel. Thank you for engaging. Operator Starsky was in the chat. You guys were talking with them. I love that. But definitely more panels in the future. I reached out to Jake Bro. He's not interested. I tried, actually. He said no thanks, actually, in the responses. So I don't think we'll get Jake on, but we'll have Georgie from Ukraine Matters back on. No problem there at all. Obviously, Operator Starsky. I would love Ukrainian women, pro-Ukrainian women. I've nothing against it. My very first panel had both Annas on. I'll bring them back on, but I would like more and more and more. But I can only do so much, and when I ask for panelists, that's like I got to set it up, and I can't like wait for so long. And whoever's like down to do it, like I'm gonna get them on before like, oh well, got to make sure I'm gonna make sure the panel is done. But if you're interested, anyone, like, please come through, just like we did the last 2 days. I hope that can show you that it's pretty comfortable. You're gonna get your time to speak. I'm not gonna let one person run the whole thing and talk only. A lot of panels are ran like that, where like 1 or 2 people talk the whole time, and then the other 3-4 people just kind of don't talk a whole lot. But I want to make sure everybody gets their voice heard and is able to have time in these panels, and that will continue. So I hope to see you guys later, about a half hour from now, right here on Mercado Media. Subscribe to the YouTube channel with your notification bell on, and I'll see you guys then. Take care.